Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. In the countryside where I lived in Montana, there was a river that everyone knew, a calm river with clean water where folks always went fishing. It was a beautiful place surrounded by trees, with large rocks on the banks where we'd sit to fish or just talk. The water was so clear you could see the bottom almost everywhere. But there was a deeper pool at a bend in the river where the water turned dark and nobody could see the bottom. The old folks always told us not to swim there, that it was dangerous, that the current was treacherous and could pull a person down. We respected that and always stayed in the shallower parts. My cousin Jake was a brave guy, kind of stubborn, one of those who wouldn't take nonsense from anyone. He always questioned these stories the older folks told, said it was superstition, that he didn't believe in such things. He'd been a good swimmer since childhood, and always mocked anyone who was afraid of the deep pool. That Saturday we were fishing by the river, me, him, and some other friends. It was blazing hot, and the water looked inviting. We started swimming in the shallower parts, playing around and cooling off. That's when my cousin challenged everyone. He said he was going to dive into the deep pool to prove there was nothing special about it. We tried to convince him not to do it, reminding him of what the older folks always said, but he wouldn't listen. He said he was going to show that it was all nonsense, that there was no danger in that pool. He swam over there and dove in fearlessly. He stayed underwater for what seemed like an eternity. We started getting worried because he was taking too long to come up. When he finally surfaced, he had a strange expression on his face, as if he'd seen something that shocked him. He swam quickly to the shore and got out of the water trembling. It wasn't from cold because the day was hot. It was a different kind of trembling, as if he was very scared. We asked what had happened, but he couldn't speak properly. He just stood there staring at the pool with wide eyes. When he finally managed to speak, he said he'd seen a woman at the bottom of the pool. She had her hair all spread out in the water, floating like algae. But what scared him most was that she had her eyes open, looking up as if she was alive, but trapped at the bottom of the river. We tried to calm him down, said it must have been his imagination, that it could have been some branch or rock he mistook for a person. But he insisted he'd seen clearly that it was a woman, and that she seemed to be trying to rise, but something kept her at the bottom. That same day he became strange, kind of quiet, different from his usual self. In the following days, it got worse. He wouldn't talk to anyone, wouldn't eat properly, just stared at nothing with that frightened expression. He spent an entire week like that, as if he'd lost his voice. On the 8th day, he disappeared from home at dawn. His family searched everywhere, asked the neighbors, but nobody had seen him. It was only late in the morning that they found him sitting on the riverbank, right near the deep pool. When they got there, he was completely naked, sitting on the rock as if he'd just gotten out of the water. His body was covered with that green slime that sticks to rocks at the bottom of rivers. And he kept repeating the same phrase. She called, and I heard her. They took him home and tried to get him to bathe to clean himself, but the slime stuck to his skin like glue. And he kept repeating the same thing, as if it was the only phrase he could say. She called, and I heard her. That's all that came out of his mouth. They called the doctor from town, but he couldn't explain what had happened. He said it wasn't anything physical, that it seemed more like some kind of psychological trauma. But nobody could understand why he'd become like that, why he was covered with that slime. After a few days, he returned to normal and started saying other things, but he never wanted to talk about what happened in that pool. Every time someone asked, he'd change the subject or walk away. And he never got close to the river again, not even the shallow parts. Even today, when I pass near that pool, I remember my cousin's story. And sometimes, when the water is very calm, it seems like you can see something moving down there at the bottom, as if there really is someone down there waiting for someone to approach. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. I grew up in a house in rural Arizona, where the front yard was all fine, white sand that we'd rake every day to keep smooth. My grandmother always said a clean yard was a sign of an organized home. So every morning someone in the family would rake the sand to make it uniform, without footprints or animal tracks. It was a large yard in front of the house, surrounded by some old mesquite trees that provided shade during the day. The sand was special. It had come from a distant place, very fine and light, different from the red dirt that covered the rest of the property. When it rained, the water drained easily, and the sand dried quickly. That Tuesday morning, I woke up early as always and went to the yard to rake before having breakfast. It was a routine I enjoyed. It made me feel peaceful to start the day organizing things. When I arrived at the yard, I saw something that left me completely confused. There was a trail of footprints that started right in the middle of the yard, as if someone had fallen from the sky there. There was no arrival mark, no trail coming from anywhere. The footprints simply began in the middle of the sand, as if the person had appeared out of nowhere at that spot. The strangest thing was that the trail was only from one foot, always the left one. And it wasn't a normal foot, only 3 toes were marked in the sand. The footprints went in a straight line from the middle of the yard to the front door of the house, stopped right in front of the door, and then returned by the same path to the point where they'd started. I called my grandmother to see this. She was intrigued too. She'd never seen anything like it. We got a ruler and measured the size of the footprints. The foot was bigger than mine, and I was already an adult. Even stranger, the marks were very deep in the sand, as if it was something very heavy that had passed there. My grandmother said it could be tracks from some animal, but what animal had only 3 toes and walked with just 1 paw? And what animal appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the yard, without leaving a trail of where it came from? She became worried and told me not to disturb the footprints until she could think about what to do. Throughout the day, we kept observing the footprints. They were well marked in the sand, didn't fade with the sun or wind. Each mark was perfect. You could clearly see the 3 toes and the foot shape. It was as if they'd been made just minutes before. Some neighbors came to see when the news spread. Everyone was impressed. Nobody could explain what could have made those marks. One of the older neighbors said it could be a sign of something, that the house's yard was being visited by some entity. 5 days passed and the footprints were still there, intact. It didn't rain during this period, it didn't blow hard, but the marks didn't leave the sand. It was as if they were permanently engraved there. And every morning when I went to check, they were exactly the same, without having lost any detail. On the 6th day, my grandmother decided it was better to erase the footprints. She said it wasn't good to leave that there for too long, that it might attract more strange things to our house. She took the rake and passed it over all the marks, smoothing the sand until it was uniform again. But the next day, the footprints were back, exactly in the same place, with the same size, the same depth. It was as if nothing had been disturbed. My grandmother was frightened and said this wasn't normal, that there was some very strong force acting there. We decided to seek help from a curandera in the region. The woman came to our house, looked at the footprints, and said it was a sign that some soul was seeking entry into our house. She said a prayer, threw coarse salt over the marks, and told us to leave it like that for a week. After a week, the footprints finally disappeared. They never returned, and the yard remained normal as it had always been. But even today, when I pass by the place where they were, I feel a strange sensation, as if something is still there, invisible, leaving marks that only it can see. Everyone in the region had heard about the woman who appeared on the road near the old cotton plantation. It was one of those stories people tell for years, passed down from father to son, but you never really believe until it happens to you. They said she died years ago waiting for her fiancé to return from Memphis, and that she kept appearing there asking for rides. I always thought it was made-up stories, the kind rural folks like to tell to scare the young ones. I passed by that road all the time on my motorcycle, going to and from work, and I'd never seen anything unusual. It was a dirt road flanked by cotton fields on both sides, beautiful during the day, but kind of eerie at night. That Wednesday night, I was coming back late from work, around 10 o'clock. I'd worked until later because it was harvest season and the boss needed to finish an urgent job. The road was dark. Only the motorcycle's headlight illuminated the path ahead. When I passed the curve where the entrance to the old plantation is, I saw a person standing by the roadside. It was a young woman alone, wearing a white dress that seemed kind of old-fashioned, the kind women used to wear back in the day, long skirt and long sleeves. Her hair was loose, covering part of her face. I slowed down because I thought it was strange to have someone there at that hour, especially a woman alone. The road was dangerous at night, a lonely place where anything could happen. I thought maybe she needed help, that something had happened. When I approached, she turned in my direction and smiled. It was a strange smile, kind of sad, as if she was upset but trying to seem happy. Her face was pretty, but there was something different about it, as if it was too pale, paler than normal. I stopped the motorcycle and asked if she needed anything, if she wanted a ride somewhere. She kept smiling, but didn't answer. She just kept looking at me with those sad eyes, as if she was trying to tell me something but couldn't. That's when I heard a strange noise, like something had broken. I looked around trying to see where the sound came from and noticed it was from the motorcycle's rearview mirror. There was a crack right in the middle, as if someone had hit it hard. This made me nervous because the mirror was perfect when I left home. I looked at the woman again, but she was still standing there, smiling in that strange way. I started getting scared and decided to leave. I revved the motorcycle and got out of there as fast as I could. During the entire way home, I kept looking in the cracked rearview mirror, afraid she might be following me. But I didn't see anything, just the dark road behind me. When I got home, I examined the mirror better. The crack was right in the middle, as if it had been made on purpose. The next day I told the story to some friends. Most laughed and said I'd encountered the famous road ghost. One of the older ones confirmed that the description matched other stories he'd heard. He said she always appeared the same way, asking for rides and causing some problem with vehicles. After that day, every time I pass by that road, especially at night, I stay alert. The rearview mirror never returned to normal, even after I tried to fix it. And there's something even stranger. Every time I pass by the spot where I saw the woman, the mirror fogs up, as if someone is breathing right behind me. I've tried cleaning it, changing the mirror, but the same thing always happens. It's as if she's still there, waiting for a ride she'll never get. Sometimes I think about stopping again to try to talk to her, but I don't have the courage. There's something about that woman that isn't normal, something that makes me very afraid. Nowadays, when I need to pass by there at night, I speed up and don't look to the sides. But I always feel that she's there on the roadside, smiling in that sad way, and waiting for someone to stop to give her a ride to nowhere. I worked as a freight helper in an old truck, one of those that travels all over the countryside carrying merchandise from one place to another. The driver was an experienced guy who knew all the dirt roads in the region, and we always found work because he was reliable and charged fair prices. That Friday, we had to take a load of construction materials to a ranch deep in the Oklahoma hills, a place you could only reach by a narrow road full of potholes. The trip was smooth. We arrived at the ranch in the middle of the afternoon and unloaded everything. The ranch owner was a simple man who paid us right and even offered coffee before we left. We loaded the truck bed with some empty sacks. He wanted us to take back to town normal stuff that always happened on these trips. We left there when the sun was already setting. The road back was the same, but during the day it always seems different from at night. The trees get closer, the sounds change, everything becomes kind of sinister. I was in the passenger seat talking to the driver about baseball when we started hearing something strange. It was singing coming from the back of the truck, from the bed. At first I thought it was the engine noise or wind hitting something loose, but listening more carefully, it was clearly a human voice. It sounded like a prayer, the kind older folks make half-sung, half-spoken. The driver heard it too and slowed down. We looked at each other without understanding anything. The truck bed was practically empty, just with those sacks the man had asked us to take. There was no way someone could be back there, we'd seen when we loaded it. We stopped the truck on the roadside and got out to see what it was. The singing continued. It clearly came from the truck bed. But when we got close, it stopped. We climbed into the bed and searched among the sacks. That's when we found an old bag that wasn't there before. At least, I didn't remember seeing it. Inside the bag was a white powder that looked like flour or talcum, and a cloth doll all torn and dirty. It was an old doll, the kind children make with scraps, but it was in terrible condition, as if it had been buried for a long time. The powder had a strange smell, kind of sour, that made you nauseous. The driver got nervous and said to throw that stuff away. He grabbed the bag and threw it in the brush far from the road, We got back in the truck and continued the trip. But we'd barely started driving when the singing returned. It was the same voice, the same prayer, coming from inside the truck bed. We stopped again, scared now. We went back to the truck bed, and there was nothing there anymore. The sacks were there, but the bag with the powder and the doll wasn't there anymore. We searched everywhere under the sacks, behind the cab, but found nothing that would explain where that voice was coming from. That's when things got really scary. The singing stopped coming from the truck bed and started coming from inside the cab. It was as if someone was praying under the seat where I was sitting. The voice was muffled, but you could clearly hear the words, even though I didn't understand exactly what was being said. The driver was trembling. I'd never seen him so scared. He was a brave man who drove alone on dangerous roads, who wasn't afraid of anything. But at that moment, he was terrified, with his hands shaking on the steering wheel. We lifted the seats, looked underneath, but there was nothing there. The singing continued, sometimes louder, sometimes softer, but always constant, as if someone was praying for the dead. It was a horrible feeling, as if we were carrying something we shouldn't. We decided to speed up and get to town quickly. During the rest of the trip, the voice continued. Sometimes it came from one side of the cab, sometimes from the other, but always from inside the truck. When we arrived in town and stopped at the gas station where we always left the truck, the singing finally stopped. We unloaded the sacks quickly and left. The next day, the driver said he didn't want to do freight to that ranch anymore. We told the story to some people, but most didn't believe it. Only an older gentleman said that region was known for these strange things, that similar stories had happened before. I never went back to that road, and the driver also changed his route. Even today, I can't explain what that was, whether it was something we picked up at the ranch, or if it was just coincidence. But every time I hear someone praying, I remember that voice coming from inside the truck. I lived on a property right on the edge of a large forest, one of those that old folks always avoided. They said it was a haunted place, that there were bad things in there. But I'd never paid much attention to these stories. To me, it was just thick woods, a place where there were wild animals, and it was dangerous to walk alone. That Thursday, I was coming back from work. It was already getting dark. I'd spent the day taking care of cattle in a more distant part of the property and was tired, wanting to get home quickly to have dinner and rest. When I was getting close to home, I saw an old man standing right at the entrance to the trail that led into the forest. He was dressed in leather clothes, well worn, the kind old cowboys used to wear. His hat was kind of faded, and his clothes had that look of someone who traveled a lot, who came from far away. When he saw me arriving, he raised his hand in greeting and came in my direction. The old man had kind of sunken eyes, his face marked by sun and time. He seemed tired, like someone who hadn't slept well for a long time. When he got close, he asked if he could stay at my house. He said he'd been traveling for a long time and needed a place to rest. It wasn't my custom to deny shelter to those who needed it, especially an old man who seemed harmless. I offered water and food, said he could sleep in the porch hammock. He thanked me, but when I offered water, he didn't drink it. He said he wasn't thirsty, just wanted to sleep a little. I took him to the house and showed him the hammock. He lay down right there, still wearing his leather clothes and hat. He said he just wanted to sleep in peace, that he'd been looking for a place to rest for a long time. There was something in his voice that gave me a strange feeling, as if he was very sad or tired in a way I'd never seen before. During the night, I woke up a few times and looked at the porch. The old man was always in the same position, quiet in the hammock, as if he was sleeping deeply. He didn't snore, didn't move, he was completely still. I thought he must be really exhausted to sleep so heavily. Early in the morning, when I got up to make coffee and take care of the animals, I went to see if the old man was awake. The hammock was empty. I thought he'd woken up early and left without saying anything, maybe so as not to bother me. But when I looked more carefully, I saw there was an old hat on the ground right under the hammock. It was the hat the old man had been wearing the night before. And scattered around the hat was a bunch of coarse salt, as if someone had spilled a handful there. I picked up the hat to examine it. It was very old, older than it had seemed the night before. The leather was dried out, almost falling apart, as if it had been stored for many years. And the coarse salt was spread in a perfect circle around the place where the hammock had been. I was intrigued because I didn't have coarse salt at home. I only used regular salt, the fine cooking kind. And the old man wasn't carrying anything besides the clothes he was wearing. Where had that salt come from? I asked the neighbors if they'd seen the old man passing by early in the morning, but nobody had seen anything. It was strange because there was only one path to leave my property, and the neighbors were always in their yards at that time, taking care of their animals. I kept the hat and tried not to think too much about it. But a few weeks later, talking to an older neighbor, I told him about the old man. The man got a strange expression and asked what he looked like. When I described the old man, he said it sounded like the description of a cowboy who died in the region many years ago. He told me the man had gotten lost in the forest and was never found again. They said he sometimes appeared asking for shelter, always the same way, always wearing the same leather clothes. I don't know if I believe that story, but I never saw the old man again. And the hat he left was kept at my house for a long time, until one day it simply disappeared. It was on a shelf in the bedroom, and when I went to look for it, it wasn't there anymore. Even today, when I pass near the forest entrance, especially at the end of the afternoon, I get a strange feeling. It's as if someone is watching me from inside the woods, waiting for the right time to appear again. I worked at a small school in rural Kansas, one of those one-room schools where you teach several grades at the same time. It was a simple brick building with a yard in front and a not very high fence that separated it from the road. The school was kind of isolated, surrounded by pastures and some old oak trees. I always arrived early to prepare lessons and organize things. I liked that moment of silence before the children arrived, when I could think about what I was going to teach and arrange materials without hurry. It was a routine that made me feel peaceful. That Tuesday morning I arrived as always around 6:30. When I was opening the school gate, I saw a little girl sitting on the fence, swinging her legs and humming softly. She must have been around 7 or 8 years old, wearing a simple dress and had somewhat messy hair. I thought it was strange because it was very early for a child to be at school, and parents never let their children arrive alone before I was there. I thought maybe it was some emergency at home and her parents had dropped her off early. I approached to greet her and ask if everything was okay. The little girl looked at me and smiled, but didn't answer when I asked her name. She had a sweet smile, but her eyes were kind of sad, as if she was upset about something. She kept singing the same little song, a lullaby I didn't recognize. I asked again who she was, where she'd come from, but she just smiled and kept swinging her legs. I thought maybe she was shy or had some problem and didn't want to talk. I decided to let her stay there and go into the school to open the classrooms and prepare things. When I turned to get the key from my purse and looked again, the little girl had disappeared. I looked around the yard at the road, searched behind the trees, but there was nobody there. It was impossible for her to have left so quickly without me seeing. The fence wasn't high, but a small child couldn't have jumped over and run away so fast. I was intrigued, but thought maybe she'd hidden or run away while I was distracted. I entered the school and started preparing the lesson. When the other children arrived, I asked if they knew a little girl who'd been at the school early in the morning. The children looked at each other with a strange expression. One of the older ones, who always knew everything that happened in the region, said it must be the girl who fell in the well a long time ago. I asked what story that was, because the school didn't even have a well. The children told me that years ago, before they were born, a little girl had fallen into a well that used to be where the schoolyard is now. They said she drowned, and that sometimes she appeared around there, especially early in the morning. They spoke as if it was the most normal thing in the world, as if every child in the region knew this story. I didn't really believe the story. I thought it was one of those legends children make up. But the following Monday, when I arrived at school, I found the name Emma written on the classroom floor in chalk. I was sure I'd left everything clean on Friday, and the name was written in childish handwriting, very neat. I asked the children if anyone had written it, but they all denied it. I looked at the chalk box, and it was the same way I'd left it. No chalk was missing or dirty. It was as if the name had appeared by itself there. This started happening every Monday. I'd arrive at school and find the name Emma written on the floor, always in the same neat childish handwriting, always in the same place. I tried locking the school better, checking if anyone was getting in, but I never found anything. The children didn't seem surprised by this. They said it was Emma who wrote her name, that she liked the school and wanted everyone to know she was there. They spoke with a naturalness that made me even more intrigued. I never saw the little girl on the fence again, but every Monday the name was there. And sometimes, when I arrived very early, I felt as if someone was watching me. A strange feeling that I wasn't alone in that place. I worked at that school for 2 years, and the name kept appearing every week. When I left there, I told the story to the teacher who came to replace me. She laughed and said she didn't believe in such things. But a few months later, she found me in town and said that the name Emma appeared every Monday in her classroom too. I took that dirt road every day to get milk from Mr. Henderson's farm in rural Kentucky. It was a path where only one car could pass at a time, full of curves and hills, typical of the countryside. The earth was red clay that stuck to bicycle wheels when it rained, and when it was dry, it kicked up a terrible dust. That Wednesday, I was coming back from the farm with the milk cans tied to the back of my bicycle. It was late afternoon, but there was still enough light to see the road clearly. I knew every pothole, every curve of that road because I'd been making this trip since I was a kid. I was pedaling on a straighter part where the road went uphill a bit and had woods on both sides, when I saw something moving among the trees on the right side. I thought it might be some animal, maybe a dog or a pig that had gotten loose, because it was common to see animals on the road. I slowed down and kept watching. What I saw left me frozen. It was something that looked like a person but walked on all fours like an animal. Its back was high, kind of hunched, and it moved in a strange way, as if it didn't know exactly how to walk. It was coming out of the woods slowly, without any hurry. I stopped the bicycle completely and kept staring. The creature crossed the road very slowly, as if it knew I was watching and didn't care. When it turned in my direction, I almost fell off the bicycle. The face was completely smooth, no mouth, no nose, no eyes. It was as if someone had taken a piece of flesh and molded it into the shape of a head, but forgotten to make the details. The thing looked at me, or at least turned its head in my direction, even though it had no visible eyes. It stood there for a few seconds, as if it was studying me. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. It was as if my body had completely locked up. After those seconds that seemed like an eternity, the thing continued crossing the road and entered the woods on the other side. It disappeared among the trees as if it had never been there. Only the sound of branches breaking showed that something had passed through there. I stood there on the road for a long time, trying to process what I'd seen. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my head. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the bicycle handlebars. Cold sweat was running down my back despite the cool evening weather. When I finally managed to move, I turned the bicycle around and started pushing it toward home. I didn't have the courage to pedal because I was afraid of making noise and attracting the attention of that thing. I pushed the bicycle the entire way, looking back every few meters, afraid that it might be following me. The way back seemed to take hours. Every noise in the woods made me quicken my pace. When I saw a branch swaying, I thought it was the creature coming back. I only breathed with relief when I got home and locked the gate behind me. I told my family what I'd seen, but nobody really believed it. They said it must have been some injured animal, or that I'd confused things in the moment of fright. But I knew what I'd seen. That image was burned into my head with every detail. In the following days, I had to keep taking the same path to get milk, but I never went alone again. I always asked someone to go with me, or waited for an acquaintance to pass by so I could go along. I never saw the creature again, but every time I passed the spot where it had crossed, I felt a chill and pedaled faster. Even today, when I need to pass by deserted roads in the countryside, I remember that afternoon and always stay alert to movements in the woods, afraid of seeing again that strange thing crossing the path. There are places you know are different, that have something that shouldn't be there. I lived in a simple house in the middle of farmland in rural Nebraska, a place where everyone knew each other and houses were scattered, each on its own piece of land. We raised chickens, pigs, had a dairy cow, those things that country folks always had. Life was peaceful, without much news. My neighbor Martha's house was about 300 yards from ours, separated by a pasture where she raised some goats. She was an elderly lady who lived alone since her husband died, but she got along well. She raised a bunch of chickens, and had an old rooster, kind of bald, that woke everyone up early in the morning with his crowing. It was in November that things started. Martha's rooster began crowing always at midnight sharp. It was strange because roosters normally crow at dawn when it's about to get light, never in the middle of the night. But this rooster started crowing right at midnight every single night without fail. At first, it was kind of funny. I even commented to my mother that the neighbor's rooster was confused about the time. But after a week of crowing at midnight every day, it started to bother us. It wasn't just the noise that disturbed our sleep. There was something about his crowing that made us uneasy. People in the region started talking. They said a rooster crowing at midnight was a bad omen, that some misfortune was going to happen. My grandmother, who understood these things, said that when an animal changes its behavior like that, it's sensing something we don't sense. She got worried and suggested someone should talk to the neighbor about the rooster. But before anyone could do anything, the tragedy happened. A child from the village, a boy around 8 years old, started feeling sick. It was high fever that wouldn't break no matter what. His parents took him to town, to the health clinic, but they couldn't figure out what it was. In 3 days, the boy died. It was something that shook everyone. It was a known family, good people, hardworking. The boy was healthy, played, ran around. He'd never given trouble with illness. His death left the whole community shaken. The funeral was at the village cemetery, a simple affair as it always was around there. Everyone went. It was the custom to accompany when someone died. It was a very sad day. The boy's mother almost fainted from crying so much. That night after the funeral, the rooster crowed again at midnight. But this time it was different. The crowing lasted longer and seemed louder, more desperate. Everyone heard it because nobody was sleeping well after what had happened. The next morning when I woke up, I heard my mother talking to the neighbor in the yard. I went to see what it was and discovered that the rooster had been found dead. It was hanging by its feet on the fence that divided the two properties, with its head turned toward where the sun rises. It was a strange scene because nobody had hung the rooster there. It was tied with a string that nobody knew where it had come from. What caught the most attention was the position of the head. Even upside down, it was turned exactly toward the east, as if it was looking toward where the sun was going to appear. The neighbor said she'd never seen anything like it. The rooster had been fine the night before, eating normally with the other chickens. Some people from the village came to see. Nobody said much, but everyone had a strange expression on their faces. One of the older ladies said it was better to bury the rooster as if it were a person, with respect. She said that when an animal dies under strange circumstances like that, you can't just throw it away. That's what they did. They dug a small hole in the neighbor's yard and buried the rooster carefully. Some people lit candles and stood there for a few minutes in silence. It was as if they were holding a wake. After that day, nothing strange ever happened again. The neighbor's other chickens continued normal, crowing at the right times. But the village people never forgot that story. When someone new arrived in the region, they always told about the rooster that crowed at midnight. Even today, when I pass near that fence where they found the rooster, I remember the whole story. And every time I hear a rooster crow at the wrong time, I get a tightness in my chest, remembering those strange days that changed our village. I was taking care of the cattle that afternoon when the heifer ran away. It was a young cow my father had bought not long ago, still kind of wild, not used to the place yet. The pasture where she went was on a higher part of the property in Colorado, a place we only went when necessary. It was kind of closed off, full of pine trees and brush. One of those places that gives you a weird feeling when you're alone there. I grabbed a rope and went up after her. The sun was already setting, and I knew I had to be quick, because after dark it would be hard to find the animal. The path uphill was kind of steep, full of loose rocks and holes. I knew that trail well. I'd grown up walking around there, but always during the day. At night, it was different. The sounds changed. Everything became more sinister. When I reached the higher part where the pasture opened up a bit, I started looking for the heifer. I called for her, clapped my hands, made those sounds that cattle know. The wind was kind of strong and swayed the trees around. It was just that sound and nothing more, that heavy silence of the countryside. That's when I heard my mother calling me. It was her voice, shouting my name like she always did when she wanted me to come home. But there was something strange. The voice came from the middle of the woods, from a part where there was no trail, where nobody could walk properly because of the thorns and uneven terrain. And my mother never came up there. She was afraid of snakes and always told us to be careful when going to the high pasture. I stopped where I was and listened carefully. The voice kept calling me, always the same way, always with the same intensity. It didn't have the natural variation people have when they really shout. It was as if someone was repeating the same thing without stopping. I started feeling uncomfortable. A bad feeling rose in my chest. I thought about going over there to see what it was, but something inside me said not to go. It was a strange instinct, as if my body knew there was danger there. My mother's voice continued, but now I noticed it wasn't moving. It always came from the same place, always the same. I decided to run down, leaving the heifer behind. I went down the trail as fast as I could, stumbling on rocks and scratching my arms on branches. During the whole way, I could still hear the voice, but it got weaker as I moved away. When I got home, my mother was in the kitchen stirring something at the wood stove. I asked if she'd gone up to the pasture looking for me. She looked at me with surprise and said no, that she'd been home the whole time, that she hadn't even left the yard since afternoon. I told her what had happened, and she got worried. She said I shouldn't have gone alone to the pasture at that hour. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the voice, trying to understand what it had been. Early the next morning I went back there to look for the heifer. I found her quickly, but she was dead. She was lying in a cleaner area of the pasture, as if she'd lain down to rest and never woke up. What gave me chills was that she had her eyes wide open, fixed in the direction of our house down below. It was as if she died looking toward home, as if she knew she should be there, and not in the middle of the woods. There was no animal mark, no wound, nothing that would explain why she died. I called my father to see. He examined the heifer and said sometimes it just happened, that cattle died like that from natural causes. But that fixed look from the heifer bothered me a lot. It was a fixed stare, as if she'd seen something before dying. After that day, I never heard that voice again, and I never went alone to the high pasture when it was getting dark. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd followed the voice that night. If it really was my mother calling me from some impossible place. or if it was something else trying to lead me into the woods. Even today, I can't explain what that was. I only know it was the strangest thing that ever happened to me, and that every time I pass near that pasture, especially at the end of the afternoon, I feel a chill on my spine and quicken my pace. I lived in a small town in rural Oregon where everyone knew each other and things happened slowly. To get to the town market, you could take the main road that made a big loop, or use a trail that cut through the forest. The trail passed through a place folks called Pine Ridge because of some rocks that formed a small elevation in the terrain. The trail was well used during the day. Everyone passed through there to save time and energy. It was a peaceful path, well marked, that went between the trees and came out right near the market. You could cut about 20 minutes of walking, something important when you needed to go and come back the same day carrying groceries. But there was an unwritten rule that everyone respected. After 6 in the evening, nobody used that trail. It wasn't officially forbidden. It was more a custom passed down from generation to generation. Older folks always said not to pass through there when it started getting dark, that it was dangerous, that strange things happened. The stories that circulated about the trail were various. Some said there were dangerous animals, others talked about ghosts. But the story that was repeated most was about the whistling. They said that whoever whistled on the trail after 6, especially in the part that passed through Pine Ridge, never came back the same way. I always thought these stories were nonsense from superstitious people. I was young, kind of stubborn, one of those who don't believe in anything they don't see with their own eyes. I always mocked when someone talked about these things, said it was all made up to scare children. That Thursday, I'd gone to the market to buy some things for my mother and ended up taking longer than expected. When I left there, it was already past 6:30. Everyone advised me to go back by the main road, which was safer. But I was in a hurry and didn't want to take that whole detour carrying bags. I decided to take the trail anyway, thinking it was all nonsense and nothing would happen. I entered the forest with the sun already setting, but there was still enough light to see the path. The trail was silent, just the sound of my footsteps and the wind in the tree leaves. When I got to the Pine Ridge part, where the rocks formed that elevation and the trees got taller and thicker, I decided to play a prank. I thought about the stories people told and decided to test if it was really true. I stopped in the middle of the trail and whistled a song I knew well, an old folk tune. The sound of my whistling echoed among the trees and got lost in the forest. For a moment there was just silence, and I was going to keep walking, satisfied that I'd proven it was all nonsense. That's when I heard the response. It was another whistle, much thinner than mine, longer and more melodious. It came from high up in the trees, as if someone was perched up there whistling back at me. The sound was beautiful but had something strange about it, something that gave me chills. I stopped where I was and looked up, trying to see who or what was making that sound. But the trees were too tall and thick. I couldn't see anything beyond the branches and leaves. The whistling continued for a few more seconds and then stopped. I stood there for a while, waiting to see if anything else would happen. I started getting nervous, but tried to convince myself it must have been some bird or the wind making noise in the branches. I decided to keep walking, but faster now, wanting to get out of there soon. That's when I started feeling something passing by me. It was as if there was something invisible moving around me, a presence I couldn't see but could clearly feel. It was a cold sensation, as if someone was running cold fingers across my back and arms. The feeling got stronger as I walked. It was as if something was accompanying me, walking beside me, touching me from time to time with icy fingers. I started walking faster, almost running, wanting to get out of that trail as soon as possible. When I finally left the forest and reached the street, I was in a cold sweat with my heart racing. I ran home and only calmed down when I locked the door behind me. My mother asked why I looked scared, but I didn't tell her anything, afraid she'd get worried. It was only the next day that I realized something was wrong with me. When I went to brush my teeth in the morning and looked at myself in the mirror, I saw that my mouth was kind of crooked, as if one side had become slightly paralyzed. I didn't feel pain, but I couldn't make normal movements with my lips. I tried to whistle to test, but no sound came out. It was as if I'd forgotten how to do it, as if the ability had simply disappeared. I spent 2 whole days trying to whistle, but couldn't make any sound, no matter how hard I tried. On the 3rd day, I finally managed to whistle again, but there was something very strange. The sound that came from my mouth didn't seem to come from me. It was as if it was coming from somewhere behind me, as if someone was whistling along with me, but with a different voice than mine. Even today, when I whistle any song, I hear that strange sound mixed with mine. It's as if I brought something with me from that trail, something that's now part of me and won't leave me alone. And I never passed through Pine Ridge Trail again, especially after 6 in the evening. I worked on a large farm in rural Iowa during harvest season, when they needed a lot of hands to work the fields. It was heavy work, but paid well, so people came from everywhere looking for jobs at the right time. The farm provided lodging for workers who came from far away, a big wooden shed where we hung our hammocks to sleep. The shed was near the fields, a simple but sufficient building for what we needed. It had about 20 hammocks set up, a row on each side, and in the middle was the space where we kept our things and talked before sleeping. It was a noisy environment, full of people talking, laughing, telling stories, but welcoming in its own way. At the back of the shed was a large clothesline made with thick rope where we hung our washed clothes to dry. It was a long line that went from one wall to the other, well stretched and strong, that could hold the weight of lots of wet clothes. During the day, there were always clothes hanging there, but at night, we'd take everything down so as not to bother those who slept nearby. That night, I was more tired than usual. It had been a day of heavy work under the hot sun, and when it was time to sleep, I was exhausted. I lay down in the hammock and fell asleep quickly, something that wasn't normal for me, because I usually stayed awake for a while, listening to the others' conversation. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange noise. It was like something was creaking, a continuous sound coming from the back of the shed. I opened my eyes and listened, trying to identify where the noise was coming from. It was a sound like stretched rope making, that noise rope makes when it's being forced. I lifted my head from the hammock and looked toward the clothesline. What I saw left me completely frozen. There was a woman lying on top of the rope, as if it were a hammock, swaying slowly from side to side. It was a very thin woman wearing a dress that seemed torn in several places. She was lying on her back, looking at the shed's ceiling, completely motionless except for the gentle swaying the rope made. Her hair was long and black, hanging from both ends of the clothesline, almost touching the floor. It was a disturbing image because it made no sense for a person to be able to lie on a rope like that. I stayed still in my hammock, unable to move, just staring at that strange scene. The woman didn't move, didn't make noise. She just stayed there swaying gently. The torn dress let you see she was very thin, almost skeletal, as if she hadn't eaten in a long time. I tried to call some of the other workers sleeping nearby, but my voice wouldn't come out. It was as if my throat was blocked by shock. I blinked hard, thinking I might be dreaming, that this couldn't be real. When I opened my eyes again, the woman had disappeared. The clothesline was empty, with nobody on top, but it was still swaying from side to side, as if someone had just gotten off it. The movement of the rope was very visible, and the creaking sound continued as it swayed. I stayed awake the rest of the night, looking at the clothesline and waiting to see if the woman would appear again, but nothing else happened. Just that swaying that gradually diminished until the rope was still. In the morning, when the others woke up, I didn't say anything about what I'd seen. But when we went to hang the washed clothes on the line, we found something strange. Among the clothespins scattered along the rope, there were several strands of long black hair, as if someone had been lying there and lost hair on the rope. The strands were very long and jet black, just like the hair of the woman I'd seen the night before. Some of the other workers found it strange, wondered where that hair had come from, because none of us had long hair like that. One of the older ones looked at the hair strands and got a strange expression. He said he'd heard of things like this happening in other places, that sometimes women who died of hunger or sadness appeared, wandering around looking for a place to rest. That night, nobody wanted to sleep near the clothesline. Everyone moved their hammocks farther away, leaving that area empty. And in the following days, even though nobody appeared anymore, we kept avoiding that corner of the shed. I finished my work on the farm a week later and left. But I never forgot that image of the thin woman swaying on the clothesline, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And even today, when I see a clothesline with clothes hanging, I remember her and wonder if there aren't more people out there looking for a place to rest. I've been driving a taxi through the streets of Phoenix, Arizona for over 20 years now. My name is Rick, and during all this time in the profession, I've met people of every kind and lived through situations that most folks can't even imagine. From drunk brawls to armed robberies, I've witnessed it all. But there's one thing that happened to me on a September night that still messes with my head and makes me wonder if we really understand how this world works. That particular night, everything was quieter than usual. The sky didn't have a single cloud, and the stars were shining in a way that caught your attention. I spent the entire night doing runs through downtown, picking up and dropping off people at the bars and restaurants in the area. When the clock struck past midnight, I decided to swing by Union Station because there was always someone needing a ride there, even late at night. Arriving at the station, I saw a very elderly man standing under a dim streetlight. The man wore an old coat and a hat that had seen better days. He looked kind of lost and signaled for me to stop. Something told me there was something different about him, but I couldn't leave an old man alone at that hour. I pulled up the car and rolled down the window. "Need a ride, my friend?" I asked, trying to be polite. The old man nodded yes without saying anything and got into the back seat of the taxi. He closed the door very carefully. His face showed deep confusion and his hands trembled slightly. I found it a bit strange, but I didn't want to bother him with too many questions. "Where to?" I asked, looking through the rearview mirror. "I need to find my wife," he responded in a low, trembling voice. "Take me to Riverside District, please." Riverside District is a very old neighborhood here in Phoenix, full of old houses and narrow streets. I agreed and started driving there. During the entire trip, the elderly man began talking to me, telling stories from his youth. He talked about how he met his wife at a dance, how they got married and built their life together in that same neighborhood. The stories were full of details and longing, but the way he spoke made me uneasy, as if he were remembering things that happened a very, very long time ago. When we arrived at the address he requested, I was shocked. The house was completely ruined, abandoned, and covered with weeds. I felt a chill run up my spine. The old man got out of the taxi very slowly and walked toward the ruins. I watched him walk among the debris, calling out his wife's name. I waited in the car, feeling a strange mixture of curiosity and fear growing in my chest. The elderly man disappeared among the rubble and never came back. After waiting several minutes, I decided to go see what was happening. I got out of the taxi and approached the destroyed house. The door was half open, and I entered very carefully, calling for the gentleman. Inside, the house was totally devastated. There was no sign of life anywhere, just debris and the sound of my footsteps echoing. I walked further inside, looking for any trace of the old man, but found absolutely nothing. It was at that moment that I found a framed photograph thrown on the floor, almost hidden under the debris. I picked up the photo and saw a young couple smiling on their wedding day. The man in the photograph was exactly the elderly man I had picked up at the station. My heart raced immediately. I decided I needed to investigate more about this person. The next day, I went to the city library and started looking through old newspaper archives. I didn't need to search long to discover the truth. Over 30 years ago, that old man had died in a train accident. His wife died shortly after, unable to bear the pain of the loss. The house had been abandoned ever since. I felt my stomach turn. The elderly man I had transported the night before wasn't an ordinary passenger. He was a spirit lost in time, endlessly searching for his companion. I didn't know what to do with this discovery. Should I tell someone? Who would believe such a story? I came to the conclusion that I needed to talk to someone who could explain what had happened. I went to look for an acquaintance of mine, Manuel, who works as a historian and understands a lot about the legends and mysteries of Phoenix. I told him everything I had experienced from the moment I picked up the elderly man until he disappeared among the ruins. Manuel listened to me without interrupting, with a very serious expression on his face. When I finished telling the story, he showed me a very old book about the stories of our city. It had an entire chapter talking about spirits that can't rest and souls that remain trapped in our world. He explained that sometimes the spirits of people who died tragically or left unresolved issues continue here trying to settle their pending matters before they can find peace. I felt another chill run up my back. The stories in the book were chilling, but they also made me understand that I wasn't going crazy. What I had seen was real, and other people had gone through similar experiences. I decided I needed to do something to help the old man find peace. I returned to the ruined house, armed with what I had learned and with great determination to resolve this. I brought flowers and a candle, hoping to be able to communicate with the elderly man's spirit. When I arrived, the house remained as abandoned as before. I went in and placed the flowers and candle in what had once been the family's living room. I lit the candle and sat on the floor, waiting in complete silence. The house was quiet. You could only hear the wind passing through the cracked walls. Suddenly, I felt that someone was there with me in the room. I looked up and saw the old man standing right in front of me. His thin figure was illuminated by the candle's weak light. His eyes were full of suffering, but also of gratitude. I felt a strange calm, as if I were in the presence of something very special and sacred. "Thank you," said the elderly man with a voice that was barely audible. "Thank you for helping me find my way back." And after those words, he disappeared completely, leaving only a sensation of peace and tranquility filling that entire space. From that night on, the strange things in the house stopped happening completely. It seemed that the old man had finally achieved the rest he had been searching for all those years. I returned to my normal routine as a taxi driver, but the experience forever changed the way I see life. Whenever I pass near Union Station, I can't help but look around, hoping to never again encounter another lost spirit wandering about. This experience taught me that there are mysteries in this world that we'll never be able to completely explain. It made me understand that death might not be the end of everything, and that some people remain trapped between two worlds when they leave important things unresolved. Today, I drive through the streets of Phoenix, knowing that there's much more happening around us than we can see. And sometimes, when the night is very quiet and the stars shine bright in the sky, I find myself thinking about how many other lost souls are still out there, waiting for someone to help them find their way home. I've been driving a taxi for many years in the city of San Antonio, Texas. My name is Julian, and I've always preferred the late-night shifts, even knowing they're more exhausting. The truth is that during the night, I can earn extra money that makes a difference in the household budget. But there's a story that happened to me that still leaves me without explanation to this day. It was something that completely changed my way of seeing things and accompanies me every day. It was one of those very cold and dark winter nights that are common here in San Antonio. I started working at my usual time, but I noticed it was quieter than normal. The streets were practically empty, and my radio barely rang with calls. I spent several hours driving around without getting many rides, so I decided to continue until later to try to make up for it. When it was about 1 a.m, things started getting strange. I was driving on a very isolated road on the outskirts of the city when I saw a person in the distance, signaling for me to stop. By instinct, I hit the brakes and stopped beside the road. It was a man with a small child, and both seemed to be in some kind of trouble. "Need a taxi?" I asked, finding it a bit odd to encounter people in that remote place, especially at this hour. The man was visibly nervous and nodded yes. "Yes, please. We need to get somewhere urgent." The child could barely look through the window and remained silent the whole time, but you could see in her eyes a mixture of fear and exhaustion. Without asking anything else, both got into the car, and I asked them to tell me the address. The man gave me a place very far away in the suburbs, an area that almost never gets taxis at this hour. As we traveled down the road, I noticed that the man and child were becoming increasingly agitated. I tried to make conversation about the weather or the city, but it didn't work. They seemed to be thinking about something else, as if they had some very big concern. Suddenly, I saw a flashing light up ahead, along with a strange sound of crushed metal. When we got closer, I realized it was a car accident. There was a completely destroyed vehicle, stopped on the shoulder, all twisted, almost unrecognizable in the dark of night. Automatically, I slowed down to pass through the area. It was at that moment that I noticed something was very wrong. My two passengers, the man and the child, had disappeared from the back seat. My heart raced as I looked everywhere, trying to understand what had happened. How could they have vanished like that out of nowhere? Could they have fallen out of the car? But that didn't make sense. All trembling, I stopped the taxi on the shoulder and ran out to search the area. The headlight beams barely illuminated the darkness around the accident. I shouted, calling for them in the night, but only the echo returned to me. That's when I saw a dark shadow, almost invisible, among the wreckage of the automobile. I approached slowly, with a horrible feeling in my stomach, while stepping on pieces of glass and metal. What I saw after that froze my blood. The man and child were lying on the ground, near the destroyed car, lifeless. Their eyes were fixed on the sky, as if they were looking for some answer in the stars. A shiver ran up my spine as I backed away, unable to take my eyes off that terrible scene in front of me. How had they gotten there, and what had happened to them inside my taxi? Without thinking twice, I ran back to the car and started the engine. I needed to get out of there as fast as possible to get away from that death and sadness. With my heart beating hard in my chest, I floored the accelerator and left at high speed, leaving behind that dark mystery I had witnessed. After that night, nothing was the same. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, remembering that accident and the ghosts of that man and child. They keep appearing in my dreams, reminding me that life can end at any moment, and that there are things in this world that we'll never be able to explain. I learned that there are mysteries that are better left unanswered because some truths are too heavy to carry. That experience taught me that sometimes we become unwilling witnesses to events that transcend our understanding, and that the line between life and death might be thinner than we think. Now, whenever I drive past that stretch of Highway 101, I can't help but slow down and look toward the spot where that terrible accident happened. Sometimes, on very dark nights, I think I see shadows moving among the wreckage that was cleared away long ago. And I wonder if those lost souls are still trying to reach their destination, still searching for someone to help them find their way home. The memory of that night reminds me that we live in a world full of mysteries, and sometimes we're chosen to be part of stories that we may never fully understand. All I know is that somewhere on that lonely highway, two spirits found me in their moment of need, and perhaps, in some strange way, I helped them on their final journey. I'm Eduardo Morales, and I drive a taxi here in Denver, Colorado. I've been doing this for more than 20 years now, picking up people in the middle of the night, listening to all kinds of crazy stories. But there's one thing that happened to me that still makes my hair stand on end to this day. It was on an October night, raining like the end of the world. And I swear I'll never be able to get it out of my head. There was a hell of a storm outside. The streets looked like a desert. Only someone who was really desperate would risk going out. The rain was hitting the windshield of my car so hard I could barely see ahead. I thought it was going to be a wasted night, with hardly anyone to pick up. Even so, I went out driving around the city. Maybe someone needing a ride would show up. I spent more than 2 hours driving through empty streets, just listening to the sound of the windshield wipers and the water falling on the roof. I stopped at a corner to have coffee at a shop that stays open 24 hours. I was there drinking my hot coffee when I felt something strange, like someone was watching me from behind. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. I went back to the car trying to forget that bad feeling. It was almost 1 a.m. when I saw him. A guy standing in the heavy rain without an umbrella, without anything, just a well-tailored black suit and a big hat that covered his face. At first, I thought twice about whether I was going to stop. There was something about him that gave me a tightness in my chest. But what can you do? A taxi driver can't be too choosy, especially on a night like this. I approached slowly and rolled down the window. The man leaned in to talk to me and asked, in a very low and cold voice, for me to take him to Cherry Creek. I nodded yes, but immediately I smelled a strange sulfur odor coming from him. When he opened the door and got in the back, the smell got even stronger. The trip there passed in frightening silence. The guy didn't say anything else, and every time I tried to make conversation, he stayed quiet. When I looked in the mirror, I saw his eyes that looked like 2 black holes staring at me in a way that gave me chills all over. The rain continued strong, and the thunder wouldn't stop making noise. That bad sulfur smell was taking over the entire car, making me nauseous. Halfway there, the headlights started flickering, and the radio started making strange static noises before turning off by itself. My heart raced. Something very wrong was happening. We arrived at a somewhat abandoned part of Cherry Creek, on a dark and narrow street that I didn't remember seeing before. The man told me to stop in front of an old house, almost falling apart. I turned off the engine and turned to collect the fare, but the words died in my mouth. The man had raised his head and was looking directly into my eyes. His eyes glowed red like fire, and a terrifying smile appeared on his face. A damn chill ran down my body. I tried to open the car door, but it wouldn't budge. We were trapped in there. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, and his voice echoed in a way that didn't sound human. I couldn't say anything. Fear had left me stiff as a rock. "I am the one everyone fears, the one who walks in darkness, the one who feeds on people's terror. Tonight, Eduardo, you met the devil himself." The car lights started flashing like crazy, and the sulfur smell became unbearable. It felt like the air was getting thick, crushing me from all sides. His face deformed into something horrible. His eyes turned into 2 red embers, and his skin became all red, full of marks that looked like burns. I tried to scream, but no sound came from my throat. The creature leaned toward me, and the hot, stinking breath hit my face. "You're mine now," he whispered, and it was like thousands of icy needles pierced my skin. In a last attempt to escape, I hit the door with all the strength I had, and to my surprise, managed to force it open. I threw myself out of the car and fell into the mud of the street, with the rain washing my face full of terror. I looked back and saw the demon looking at me with that diabolical smile, while his body was disappearing in a black smoke full of sulfur. I ran without looking back, my footsteps echoing in the silent dawn. I only stopped when I reached a small church, where I threw myself on the stairs, trembling and soaked. The priest, who was on duty, found me and helped me inside. He listened to my story with amazement and pity at the same time. I spent the rest of the night in the church without being able to sleep, praying for protection. When day broke, I left still shaking with fear. My car was in the same place where I had left it, but inside everything was burned, as if a bomb had exploded in there. After that day, I never worked at night again, and I always carry a rosary that the priest blessed for me. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see those red eyes and smell the sulfur. Even though many people don't believe my story, I know very well what I saw and what I went through. This experience taught me that evil can appear in any way at the moment we least expect it, and that we always have to be prepared to face it, even when it seems impossible to win the battle. That rainy night, when the demon got into my car, will never leave my memory, and I'll carry these marks for the rest of my life. I am Eduardo Morales, and this is my true story, a story that changed me forever, and showed me that there are things in this world that we can't explain, but that are too real to be ignored. My name is Osvaldo, and I've been driving a taxi through the streets of Chicago, Illinois, for many years. I never imagined that an ordinary work night could turn into the most terrifying episode of my life. What happened to me on that cold winter dawn still haunts me to this day. It was a freezing and gloomy night. The streets were deserted. As the hours passed, my hope of finding a passenger was diminishing. I decided to continue working until dawn, hoping that some client would appear. The dashboard clock showed 2:30 in the morning when I passed through the outskirts of the city. I knew there was an old and abandoned cemetery in that region, but I had never paid much attention to it. It was a particularly dark night. The moon barely appeared between the clouds, and the fog covered everything with a somber aspect. While driving, a silhouette appeared in the distance at the roadside. When I got closer, I could see it was a woman dressed in black with a veil covering her face. She waved for me to stop. My first reaction was hesitation, but something about her presence caught my attention. So I stopped and rolled down the window. The woman bent down and with a low and whispering voice asked me to take her to an address in downtown Chicago. Without hesitation, I opened the door and helped her get into the taxi. Her perfume was strange, a combination of wilted flowers and wet earth that caused me an unsettling sensation. During the entire trip, the woman remained silent. The silence was so intense that I could hear my own breathing and my heartbeat. As we continued, I began to feel a strange oppression in my chest, as if an invisible hand was slowly suffocating me. I tried to make conversation to reduce the tension, but the woman didn't respond. She just looked out the window, as if she were seeing something I couldn't see. When we arrived at the address she had given, I was surprised to find myself in front of an old and abandoned mansion. The windows were broken and the doors covered with graffiti. It certainly didn't look like a place where someone lived. I looked in the rearview mirror to ask if she was sure it was there, but she was no longer there. I turned around quickly to check the back seat, but it was empty. A chill ran up my spine. I got out of the car and started looking around the area, shouting for her, but got no response. The fog had gotten thicker, and the silence was total. I felt a presence behind me, and when I turned around, I saw the woman in black standing exactly at the entrance of the mansion. Her eyes, now uncovered, were two dark holes, lifeless. Paralyzed with fear, I watched the figure begin to disappear slowly, as if she were dissolving in the air. Without thinking, I ran back to the taxi and accelerated to the maximum. My heart was beating uncontrollably, and my hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the steering wheel. I only stopped when I reached a gas station that was open, where I sat down to calm myself. The minutes passed, and I couldn't get the image of the woman and her mysterious disappearance out of my mind. I tried to find a logical explanation for what had happened, thinking that maybe it was a hallucination caused by fatigue, but something inside me knew that what I had seen was real. That night I could barely sleep. The days that followed were a nightmare. Whenever I passed near the cemetery or the old mansion, I felt a threatening presence, as if someone or something was watching me. I began to notice strange things at home. Unexplained noises, shadows moving where I couldn't see clearly, and a constant feeling of being watched. One night, while examining my taxi, I found a black veil in the back seat. My heart almost stopped when I recognized it as the same one the woman wore. I tried to get rid of it by throwing it in the trash, but the next day it appeared again in the same place. No matter how many times I threw it away, it always came back. Desperate, I decided to research the mansion and the cemetery. What I discovered was terrifying. The mansion had belonged to a wealthy family that had mysteriously disappeared decades ago. The woman in black was known in local legends as the cemetery lady, a spirit who, according to stories, sought revenge for some betrayal from the past. Some said that whoever encountered her was destined to join her in death. Fear and paranoia took over me. Each night I felt her presence closer, as if she were surrounding me, waiting for the right moment to take me. My friends and family began to worry about my condition, but I didn't know how to explain what I was experiencing without seeming crazy. One night, unable to bear the suffering anymore, I returned to the cemetery. The fog was dense and the air was freezing. I walked among the graves, calling the woman in black, asking for explanations, but only silence answered me. I was about to give up when I saw her once more, standing next to an abandoned tomb, with her empty gaze directed at me. With a trembling voice, I asked her to leave me alone, to tell me what she wanted from me. Slowly, she raised a hand and pointed to a headstone. I approached and read the name carved on it. It was mine. A muffled scream came from my mouth as I backed away, stumbling over the roots of a tree. I woke up on the cemetery floor with the sun rising on the horizon. Had it all been a dream, or was that what I wanted to believe? I went back to the taxi and went home, determined to forget this nightmare. But the veil was still there, and the feeling of being watched never went away. Since then, I stopped working at night. I changed my routine, tried to forget, but the experience marked me forever. Today, years later, I still feel that something wasn't resolved that night. Sometimes, when it gets dark, I notice a familiar presence in the shadows. I know she's still there, patient, waiting for me to let my guard down. Maybe one day I'll understand what really happened. Or maybe it's better that some mysteries remain unanswered. The woman in black taught me that there are forces in this world that we can't comprehend, and that sometimes we become entangled in stories that began long before we were born. All I know is that somewhere in the darkness of that cemetery, she continues to wait, and I can only hope that when my time comes, I'll be ready to face whatever judgment awaits me. I've been driving a taxi through the streets of Portland, Oregon for over 20 years now. During all this time, I've seen many things happen in this city. Fights, robberies, people of all kinds getting in and out of my car. But there's one story I'll never forget. Something that happened on an October night that completely changed my way of seeing the world. My name is Carlos, and what I'm about to tell you might seem impossible, but it happened for real. That night the storm was very strong. The rain was falling with terrible force, flooding the streets and making everything difficult to see. The city lights were distorted in the puddles of water that formed on the asphalt. The windshield wiper could barely keep up with the rain that wouldn't stop. I decided to stay near downtown, where there's always more movement. Even knowing that most people were at home protecting themselves from the rain, I drove slowly, looking around, searching for any passenger. That's when I saw a small figure standing in the rain, completely soaked. It was a girl about 8 years old, standing on the corner under a streetlight, waving her hand for me to stop. Something told me that wasn't right, but how could I leave a child alone in that storm? I stopped the car and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I asked, trying to be kind. The girl nodded yes, opened the door, and got into the back seat. Her clothes were dripping water, and her face, despite being a child's, showed great sadness. I found it strange, but I didn't want to scare her. "Where are you going?" I asked, looking in the mirror. With her voice choked with tears, she said, "I can't find my mom. Take me home, please." She gave me an address that sounded familiar. I started driving, and the silence inside the taxi was heavy. The girl cried softly during the entire trip. I tried to talk to her to ease the situation, but she only responded with whispers. We arrived at the address she had given. It was an old house, well maintained, in a quiet neighborhood. The rain continued strong, and the house lights were almost all off. Only a weak light came from the windows. The girl ran out of the taxi and went to knock on the door desperately. I waited, feeling a mixture of curiosity and fear. The door opened, and a woman appeared. She looked at the girl with amazement and horror. Then she looked at me, and I saw that she recognized something. I got out of the taxi and approached, wanting to make sure the girl was okay. The woman, trembling, said to me, "This is my daughter, but she disappeared 10 years ago on a night just like this one." My heart raced. I looked back, but the girl was no longer there. The taxi door was open and the back seat was empty. I felt a chill run up my spine. The woman started crying, calling her daughter's name. Everything seemed like a nightmare. I went back to the taxi, trying to understand what was happening. The rain was hitting the car roof, making a deafening noise. I looked at the back seat and only saw a small puddle of water where the girl had been. The following days were total confusion. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I decided to investigate and went to the library to look through old newspapers. It didn't take long to find the story. In October 2014, a girl named Helena had disappeared without a trace. The last time anyone saw her was near her house, in a storm similar to this one. They never found the body, and the case remained unsolved. I felt a knot in my throat. The girl I had picked up wasn't an ordinary passenger. She was a lost spirit trying to come home. I didn't know what to do with this discovery. Who would believe me? I decided to look for Helena's mother. I went back to the house where I had left her. The woman, whose name was Rosa, received me with eyes full of hope and pain. I told her everything that had happened. Rosa listened to me in silence, crying. When I finished, she showed me a photo of her daughter. It was exactly the same girl who had been in my taxi. We stayed quiet for a long time, sharing a pain that went beyond time. From that day on, Rosa and I became friends, united by the same need to understand what had happened to Helena. We decided to investigate together. We spent weeks talking to neighbors and looking for clues about Helena's disappearance. We discovered that other people had also had strange experiences. Neighbors told us they had seen a girl running in the rain, heard crying on stormy nights, and felt strange presences in their homes. We realized that Helena's disappearance was part of a much larger mystery. Rosa's house was a center of paranormal activity. You could always hear footsteps in the attic, children's laughter at night, and objects moving by themselves. One day, Rosa found an old box in the attic. Inside were letters, photos, and diaries from former residents. We discovered that many years ago, an entire family had disappeared from the house without leaving any traces. The house had been abandoned for decades before Rosa moved in. Stories of disappearances and apparitions had surrounded the house since then. I was beginning to understand the dimension of what surrounded us. One night, while we were looking at the old diaries, a loud thunder echoed and the lights went out. We were in the dark with only the sound of rain and wind. At that moment, we heard a sad whisper. It was a girl's voice calling for her mother. Rosa started crying, recognizing Helena's voice. I felt a chill on my spine. I knew we needed to do something. We decided to hold a vigil that night. We sat in the living room with candles and photos of the girl. Rosa held a letter she had found in the attic. Hours passed without anything happening. The rain continued, and the wind whispered through the cracks. When we were about to give up, a candle suddenly went out, and a figure appeared in the penumbra. It was Helena, just as I had seen her in my taxi. Rosa stood up and walked toward her, crying. "Helena, my daughter," she said with a broken voice. Helena smiled slightly and extended her hand to her mother. It was an impossible moment to describe, full of love and sadness. I felt fear and peace at the same time, watching that impossible encounter. Suddenly Helena spoke. "Mommy, I can't stay. I need to go away." Her voice was soft and distant, like an echo. Rosa looked at her with pain, but also with understanding. "I love you, Helena. I'll always love you." Helena's figure slowly faded away, and the room's temperature returned to normal. We felt a strange peace, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from our shoulders. Since that night, the paranormal activity in Rosa's house decreased significantly. It seemed that Helena had finally found the peace she needed. Rosa and I continued to be friends, united by the experience that transformed us forever. Although life returned to normal, I never forgot what happened. Every time it rains, I remember the night I picked up Helena. I think about how many other lost spirits are out there trying to come home. What I experienced that night taught me that there's much more in this world than we can see. I continue working as a taxi driver, but now I see everything differently. I learned that we can't always explain what happens around us, and that sometimes it's better to accept life's mysteries. The experience with Helena showed me that the love between a mother and her daughter is stronger than anything, even death itself. And it made me understand that some encounters, even the most impossible ones, happen when we least expect them, especially on rainy October nights. I've been working as a taxi driver for more than 10 years here in Las Vegas, Nevada. During all this time, I've driven through the streets of this giant city, watching nightlife pass by through my car window, and listening to the most varied stories from passengers I pick up during the early morning hours. I've heard everything, strange reports and bizarre situations, but nothing compares to what happened to me on that night that changed my life forever. It was a night like many others. The streets were calm, and silence dominated the interior of my taxi. I decided to work late, hoping to find some desperate passenger needing to get somewhere. But the hours passed, and my car remained empty. The city lights reflected in the windows as I entered the less busy streets of the city. That's when I spotted the place. An abandoned cemetery stretched to my left. Its poorly maintained graves rose like silent witnesses to a forgotten past. It wasn't a place that inspired confidence, but as a night taxi driver, I was used to passing through unconventional locations. However, what happened next would change my vision of the supernatural forever. A figure appeared at the roadside. A woman dressed in black with a veil covering her face raised her hand, asking me to stop. My instinct told me to keep driving, not to stop before that sinister apparition, but something in her gaze made me stop. An inexplicable brightness came from her eyes, a magnetic attraction that forced me to obey. Without thinking further, I stopped the taxi before the mysterious woman. She opened the back door and sat on the seat, her presence wrapped in an aura of darkness. Silence took over the interior of the car as I resumed the path, without even asking where she wanted to go. Her destination was clear, although I still didn't know it. The trip became increasingly heavy as we entered the deserted streets of the city. The woman remained silent. Her presence seemed to suck the light coming from the taxi's dashboard. Time seemed to stretch as if we were trapped in a different dimension, far from the real world. That's when the whispers began. Disturbing voices infiltrated the taxi's interior, murmurs that seemed to emerge from the shadows themselves. I tried to ignore them, concentrating on driving, but their insistence was overwhelming. The woman in black remained motionless, as if she were used to those disturbing moans. Suddenly, the taxi stopped. I looked through the rearview mirror, searching for some sign of what had caused the stop, but there was nothing, just the darkness that spread beyond the road's limits. The woman leaned forward. Her presence became even more intense. "What's happening?" I asked, trying to hide my growing nervousness. She didn't respond. Instead, she extended her hand toward the window and pointed to the cemetery that was beside us. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I followed her gaze. That's when I saw them, dark figures moving among the graves. Their forms were almost invisible in the night's darkness. "We have to get out of here," I said with a trembling voice, feeling panic taking over me. But the woman didn't move. She stayed there, staring fixedly at the cemetery, as if she were waiting for something. That's when I heard it. A painful lament that echoed in the night, a sound that froze the blood in my veins. I looked at the cemetery, and saw how the dark figures were approaching, slowly dragging themselves in our direction. Without thinking twice, I floored the accelerator and sped away, leaving behind the cemetery and its gloomy inhabitants. The taxi shook in my hands as we moved away at high speed. The echo of the laments continued pursuing us, even when we left that cursed place behind. Finally, we reached a crossroads, and I stopped. My heart was beating hard in my chest while I tried to catch my breath. The woman in black remained silent for a few moments before finally speaking. "Thank you for your help," she said. Her voice was soft, but loaded with a power I couldn't understand. Without saying anything else, she opened the door and got out of the taxi, disappearing into the darkness. I stayed there, trembling and confused, thinking about what I had just witnessed. I don't know who that woman was or what had happened that night at the abandoned cemetery. But one thing was certain. I had lived something beyond my comprehension, something that defied all logical explanation. After that night, I make it a point to avoid passing near the abandoned cemetery. But the images of that experience continue alive in my memory. They make me reflect on how many things exist in this world that we can't explain. How many mysteries hide in the night's shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves to those who dare to venture through the city's darkest paths. The woman in black taught me that Las Vegas has secrets buried deeper than any casino vault, and that sometimes the most expensive bets aren't made with money, but with our very souls. Since that night, I've learned to respect the darkness, and to understand that some passengers carry destinations far beyond any earthly address. I'm Roger, a guy who's been working as a taxi driver for 15 years here in Seattle, Washington. During all this time, driving around morning, afternoon, and late night, I've seen many things that would make anyone's hair stand on end. I've witnessed violent fights, heavy robberies, situations that most people only see on television. I carry all kinds of people in my car, from suited executives to people in very complicated situations. But there's one night back in October, when it wouldn't stop raining, that completely changed my way of seeing the world. What happened in that early morning still affects me today, and sometimes I catch myself questioning if I really understand anything about life. The storm that night was scary. Water was falling from the sky like a waterfall, making the streets look like rivers and making it difficult for any driver to see. I was driving in a quieter region of the city, very close to a park that had seen better days. In the past, that place was full of families on weekends, children running everywhere, people having picnics. Now it was completely neglected, with a gloomy air that made anyone think twice before approaching, especially when it got dark. Everyone in the neighborhood knew about the stories that circulated about that park. The older neighbors talked about strange things that happened there, weird apparitions, bad sensations that ran down the spine of anyone who ventured to walk the trails after the sun went down. I, like any taxi driver worth his salt, was already used to these urban legends that people make up. I always thought it was just imagination. Stories that parents told children not to leave the house, or that served to scare away the curious. That's when, driving slowly because of the heavy rain, I noticed a small figure standing on the sidewalk, soaked from head to toe. It was a young boy, must have been about 8 years old, planted there under that storm, without any protection, and he made a very timid gesture, asking me to stop. Something inside me said the situation was strange. But what kind of person would I be if I left a child in those conditions? I pulled up the car and rolled down the window. "Want a ride, kid?" I asked, trying to be as friendly as possible. He nodded, confirming without saying a word, and opened the back door. He got into the back seat and closed the door without hurrying. His clothes were dripping, and even though he was just a child, he had a sadness on his face that caught my attention. That made me uneasy, but I decided not to overwhelm him with questions so as not to make the boy more nervous. "Where are you going?" I asked, watching through the rearview mirror those big, dark eyes. He pointed discreetly to a direction that seemed familiar to me. I started driving, and during the entire trip, the silence inside the taxi was heavy. I tried to talk a little to lighten the mood, but the boy only responded with short words or simply nodded. When we finally arrived at the place, I discovered it was exactly that abandoned park. A chill ran up my spine. The boy indicated that he lived on the other side of the trees, in an area of the park that was practically closed off by the undergrowth that had grown. I watched him get out of the car and run toward the trees. I thought about shouting something, but I couldn't speak. I watched him disappear into the vegetation and felt that there was something very wrong with that story. When I looked at the back seat to check if he had forgotten something, I almost fell backward. There was an old black and white photo showing a boy, the same kid who had just gotten out of my car. My heart started beating out of control. I picked up the photo and analyzed every detail. It was a very old image worn by time, and underneath someone had written, "Jose, 1975. But how was that possible? We were in 2024. This photo was almost 50 years old. A cold sweat took over my body. I needed to understand what was happening. I got out of the taxi and ventured into the park, following the same direction the boy had taken. The rain continued punishing, and my feet sank into the mud with each step. The park was immersed in a frightening darkness, only broken by the lightning that cut through the sky from time to time. I walked for what seemed like an eternity, but was probably just a few minutes. I reached a small clearing in the center of the park. There, under an old and twisted tree, I found something that froze my blood. An improvised altar with wilted flowers, melted candles, and several scattered photos, all of children. In the middle of them was the same photo I had found in the taxi, but now with the word "missing" written in large letters. Terror took over me. I started backing away slowly when out of nowhere I heard a child's voice whispering my name, "Roger." I turned immediately, but there was no one there. The park was empty, only the rain and the sound of wind existed. I felt that something was watching me, some presence I couldn't see. The whisper came back stronger this time, and a cold sensation passed right beside me. I ran without looking back, with my heart exploding in my chest. I ran back to the taxi and drove as fast as I could, without a defined destination, just wanting to get away from that cursed place. When I finally stopped to breathe, I realized I was still holding the photo tightly. I decided I had to discover the truth about that boy, about Jose. The next day, when the sun rose and gave me more courage, I went to the city library to look through old newspapers. It didn't take long to find the article. In 1975, a boy named Jose had disappeared without leaving a trace. The last time anyone saw him was in the vicinity of that park. The body was never found, and the case remained unsolved. I felt a tight knot in my stomach. The boy I had taken the night before wasn't an ordinary passenger. He was a spirit lost in time, desperately searching for the way back home. I didn't know what to do with this discovery. Tell whom? Who would believe such a story? I decided to keep the photo as a reminder of that night, and of the responsibility I began to feel for all those who never managed to return. Now, whenever I pass near that park, especially when it's dark, I feel a different kind of chill. I avoid that region during the night, but the image of Jose and the sound of his voice, calling my name, were engraved in my memory forever. Even trying to move forward with life, every time it starts raining hard, I can't help but look through the rearview mirror. I'm afraid of seeing again that boy soaked, standing in the rain, waiting for someone to take him back to a home he might never be able to reach again. This experience taught me that there are things in this world that go far beyond our comprehension, and that sometimes we're called to help souls that got lost on the way, even if we don't completely understand what's happening. The rain-soaked streets of Seattle hold more secrets than any of us realize, and sometimes, on the darkest nights, those secrets reach out to us, asking for help in the most unexpected ways. Whenever someone asks me about online dating, I go quiet for a few seconds. It's not that I have anything against it, but I lived through an experience that completely changed my perspective on meeting people through the internet. It happened when I had just turned 30, during a time when I felt lost after ending a long relationship. My relationship with Marcus had lasted almost 4 years. He always said he had commitment issues, but I suspected he just wanted to see what other options were out there. When we broke up, I entered a really difficult phase. It wasn't exactly desperation, but I felt an enormous emptiness. Even though I had close friends and good moments with them, that feeling of loneliness wouldn't go away. That's when I decided to sign up for a dating app. It was 2012, and this particular dating app was super popular. At first, it was a total mess. The system would show me guys who had nothing in common with me, or who were the complete opposite of what I was looking for. Just imagine, profiles would say things like, "Not into tall girls," or "Don't like Harry Potter fans." I'm exactly that tall and completely obsessed with Harry Potter. It seemed like a cruel joke. Even so, I kept messaging some guys, feeling more frustrated with each attempt, until I found the profile of a guy named Luke. For the first time, it seemed like I'd found someone who matched me. He had black, long hair, was taller than me, and always wore t-shirts with pop culture references in his photos. I could tell we had similar tastes. When I saw that he was interested in me too, I didn't think twice and marked that I wanted to meet him. Luckily, he responded. I sent kind of a silly message. "Your hair is beautiful. I wish mine was as shiny as yours." I know it was kind of pathetic, but in that moment, I just wanted to create a connection. He responded quickly with humor that won me over instantly. He said he'd made a deal upstairs to have that perfect hair. It was funny and different, and that really caught my attention. Soon, we started talking on the phone every day. When I heard his voice, I became even more interested. I discovered that he'd played in a local band that was known in the region, but never achieved national success. At the time, he worked at a veterinary clinic taking care of animals that were hospitalized overnight or needed special care. The more he told me, the more interesting I found him. He was funny, seemed to understand me, and had that caring way with animals. After a few weeks of talking, I started wondering how a guy like this was still single. He had everything anyone would look for. He was handsome, talented, had a good heart. It didn't make sense for him to be alone. When I mentioned this to him, that's when things changed. Luke told me he'd been married, but things got complicated and they separated. At the time, it seemed normal. Everyone has a relationship story that didn't work out. The problem is that later I discovered they hadn't actually gotten divorced. He was still officially married, just living separately from his wife. This made me uncomfortable. He explained that they no longer lived together, but still had many issues to resolve. I realized that maybe he wasn't really free to start something new. Even with this doubt, I decided to give him a chance. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. When I arrived, there he was sitting in the back of the place with that wide smile I already knew from the photos. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd found someone special. He looked exactly like his photos and had the same fun personality I knew from the phone. We talked well, and when it was almost lunchtime, I said I needed to leave, but that I'd like to see him again, maybe for dinner. He also said he'd really enjoyed the meeting. It was at that moment that the mood changed. Luke got quiet as if something bothered him. I asked if everything was okay, and he told me he needed to ask a favor but was embarrassed. He asked for a ride to his house because his car was in the shop and he'd come by taxi. He seemed genuinely embarrassed by the request, which I actually found endearing. At that moment, I felt comfortable enough with him to give him the ride without problems. What happened during the trip was totally unexpected. While I was driving, Luke started talking more about his past, how he'd grown up in a small town in Kentucky, and how life had been difficult. Then, out of nowhere, he told me something that caught me by surprise. He said that actually, he wasn't separated from his wife, as he'd implied. They'd been fighting a lot lately. She'd asked him to leave the house, but he still wanted to try to work things out with her, even though he thought it might be too late. I was speechless, trying to understand what I was hearing. Not only had he lied about being separated, but he was telling me he wanted to get back together with his wife. So why was he flirting with me and setting up dates? What kind of game was this? My heart raced. In seconds, the whole fantasy I'd created crumbled, but when I thought it couldn't get worse, Luke started crying. I looked at him without understanding anything and asked what was happening. He just asked me through tears to take him to a police station that was on the way. A police station? I asked why, but he didn't answer. He just looked at me with red eyes, with an expression I couldn't decipher. Since everything was so strange, I thought it was better to do what he asked. When we arrived, Luke got out of the car without saying anything and entered the building. I could have left right then, but something made me stay there watching. I saw when he talked to the officer at reception, and soon after, an official appeared looking concerned. Within minutes, they put handcuffs on him and took him inside. I was in complete shock. I couldn't just leave without understanding what had happened. I got out of the car, entered the police station, and asked one of the officers what was going on. The answer I received made my legs tremble. The officer told me that Luke, that charming guy I just had coffee with, had confessed to murdering his own wife that same morning. My head started spinning. I couldn't process the information. I'd spent the entire morning with someone who'd just killed his wife. Worse yet, I'd put this person in my car, been alone with him for hours. It gave me chills just thinking about the danger I'd been in without even imagining it. The police took my information, gave me a card, and released me without much explanation. I left there and stood on the sidewalk, trying to understand how my day had changed so quickly. In just a few hours, I'd gone from the expectation of meeting someone special to the terror of discovering I'd been with a murderer. The scariest thing of all is that during our meeting, he seemed completely normal. Nothing about him indicated what he really was, much less what he'd done. Days later, when the news came out in the local paper, I learned the horrible details. He'd stabbed his wife 14 times, taken the body to the bathroom, cut it into pieces, and put everything in garbage bags. As you can imagine, I closed all my dating accounts that same day and never again looked for anyone on the internet. The experience taught me that we really don't know who's on the other side of the screen, what kind of person hides behind photos and beautiful words. What still haunts me today is the awareness that on that day, I met a real killer. As much as it gives me chills every time I remember, it also taught me to be much more careful about who I go out with and what situations I put myself in. It was a brutal lesson about the risks we take when we let our guard down with people we barely know. My name is Rosa, and I'm going to tell you about an experience that completely changed the way I see people. It was in 2009. I had just gotten my first job at one of those big department stores. Like any girl new to the workforce, I was still learning to deal with difficult situations, especially with inappropriate men. In the workplace, strange guys would always show up who didn't respect boundaries. Some would get too close, make inappropriate comments, or follow me through the store corridors. Over time, I learned to be firmer and defend myself. I thought I'd seen everything, but I discovered there are things no experience prepares you to face. On any Wednesday afternoon, I was organizing products and serving customers normally when I started feeling that strange sensation of being watched. You know that chill on the back of your neck that warns you someone is paying too much attention to you. I looked up and saw a guy in a corner of the store staring at me fixedly. His eyes were very large and caused me immediate discomfort, as if something was wrong. I tried to ignore it and keep working, but he kept walking around the store without buying anything, always looking at me every few seconds. When he started approaching my counter, I mentally prepared myself to set boundaries if necessary, but he surprised me. He smiled kind of awkwardly and said, "Sorry if I made you feel uncomfortable. That wasn't my intention." I got confused and stammered something like, "No, it's okay, nothing happened." He continued, "It's just that a pretty girl like you would never go out with someone like me, right?" He said it half jokingly, but turned red like a little boy. I won't lie, I found it funny and kind of cute at the same time. The tension decreased, and we started talking. He introduced himself as John and said he worked at a mechanic shop nearby. His approach had been pretty clumsy, but also sincere. I felt bad for judging him so quickly, so I suggested we have coffee on my break. We talked a lot, and he seemed like a nice person, nothing threatening. When it was time to go back to work, I got up to leave. "If you want, I can pick you up after work to go to a party nearby. You'd be my guest," he said with that same shy way that made me blush. I had nothing planned for the night, and a party sounded fun. Besides, I felt I deserved to go out a bit. I finished my shift excited, thinking about the party and John. I hadn't been out to have fun in weeks and was anxious. Before leaving the store, I went to the bathroom, fixed my hair, and put on lip gloss. When I came out, I almost screamed in shock because he was right there waiting for me. He smiled when he saw me and widened his eyes. "Ready for the party?" he asked. I agreed, but found it strange to see no car nearby. He'd said he was going to pick me up, but maybe his friends were waiting on the next street. We started walking down the sidewalk. It was 9 o'clock at night and the streets were empty. I tried to make conversation asking if he lived nearby, but the answers were dry. Yeah, more or less, as if he didn't want to talk much. That's when I noticed the change in his behavior. He kept watching me out of the corner of his eye, like a cat hunting. He walked glued to the sidewalk, always alert, looking everywhere, as if searching for something. This started bothering me. What was this problem? He was no longer the same shy and funny guy from before. After walking for about 5 minutes, we turned onto a street, and he stopped in front of a dark alley. All my defenses activated immediately. Out of nowhere, a man appeared wearing a dirty white vest and old pants, smiling at John as if they were longtime friends. John got nervous and looked at me with anxiety. "Who's that?" I asked. "It's my friend who organizes the party. It's in that building over there," he replied, pointing into the alley. I got confused. That man didn't look like any host, and John was visibly uncomfortable. "I'm not hearing music or anything. Are you sure there's a party there?" I questioned, frowning. John spoke in an almost desperate tone. "Of course there is. Just come with us and don't ask any more questions." In that second, all my instincts screamed that I needed to get out of there immediately. I stepped back and said, "Look, I'm leaving. I don't want trouble and I need to wake up early tomorrow." But instead of accepting it, John insisted, "Don't leave. There's still time for us to have fun." Before I could turn around, he grabbed my shirt and pulled so hard that the fabric tore on my back. The other man said angrily, "Don't let her get away, you idiot." At that moment, I understood everything. This wasn't a date, it was a trap. I felt my life was in danger and started running desperately. I ran as fast as I could, with my heart racing, without looking back for even a second. The street was deserted. I heard John screaming and chasing me, but I couldn't stop. My apartment was on the next corner, but there was no one in that area to ask for help. I couldn't stop and call the police because if I tripped, they'd catch me. I ran without stopping while hearing the voices behind me. "Don't run, we're going to have fun. Rosa, stop, please." When I finally reached the entrance to my building, I saw that John had given up. He was standing about 15 feet away, panting and leaning on his knees. The other man was still running after me. I quickly entered the building and climbed the stairs as fast as possible, hearing his heavy footsteps following me. With my heart in my throat and trembling hands, I looked for the key in my purse without wasting time. In that same desperation, I almost dropped the key when trying to put it in the lock, but I managed to open it just as he reached my floor. I went in and slammed the door hard, literally at the last second. I could hear him hit the door at the exact moment I closed it. My breathing was uncontrolled. I was sweating a lot, and my heart was beating like it was going to explode. He started banging and shouting, "Open up, Open this door or I'll break it down." I trembled in total panic while he banged and kicked like a madman. I knew that if he managed to get in, it would be the end of me. Then I shouted from inside, "Everything is being filmed by security cameras, and I'm already calling the police, so you can wait there." The banging stopped immediately, and I heard him running down the hallway, fleeing from the building. I called the police immediately, but they never found the two men. After that night, they probably decided it wasn't worth risking getting arrested. Since then, I always carry a taser and pepper spray in my purse. What haunts me most is how John managed to completely fool me with that mask of a harmless guy. How I fell for his lies so easily. Whenever I remember that night, I feel a chill down my spine and wonder if other women went through the same situation. What disturbs me most is imagining that maybe they didn't have the same luck I had. There are people who think they know dangerous people just from watching movies or series, but real life is quite different. I discovered this in the worst possible way when I was much younger. At that time, I didn't know there were people capable of pretending to be completely normal while planning horrible things. The 70s were different times. We didn't have the information we have today about this type of person. Psychopaths wasn't a subject people talked about, much less something a girl like me could imagine encountering on a television program. People think they're those weird and dangerous types we always see in movies, but the truth is much scarier. Many look like normal people, even charming, with a polite smile and a sophisticated manner, but they can't feel empathy. They don't feel love or remorse. It's all an act, a mask they put on to deceive others and get what they want. This makes them very difficult to identify. The people who become their victims often can't even survive to tell what happened. Currently, there are some methods and tools that help recognize these people. But in the 70s, they didn't even believe they really existed. In 1978, I had no knowledge about this. I mean, I didn't know that at that time there was someone like Rodney Alcala, one of the most well-known and dangerous serial killers in history. And that's how, without me realizing it, I ended up on a kind of date with a psychopath. And it wasn't just any psychopath, but an extremely dangerous one, a guy who just by looking at him made you feel a chill down your spine. But at that moment, I didn't know this, and just thought it was a chance to do something different, something cool. It all started on a very famous television program, one of those dating game shows. Most people participated because they wanted to become famous or have their 5 minutes of fame on television, but that wasn't my case. I was young, inexperienced, and still believed in those fairy tale love stories I saw on television. I thought it would be incredible to meet the love of my life in a place as artificial as a television program. I remember the setup was that I had to choose between 3 guys who wanted to go out with me. I had only heard their voices because at that time there were no selfies or anything like that. And one of those voices really caught my attention. The one I only knew at that moment as candidate number 1. I still hadn't seen his face, but the guy had a charm and personality that attracted me a lot. He was funny, confident, and had something I liked, even though I couldn't explain exactly what. When the program ended and they asked who I wanted to have a date with, I didn't need to think twice. The answer was obvious. That guy had caught my attention without me even seeing his face, so I had no doubt in choosing him. They introduced us face to face for the first time, and to my surprise, he gave me a hug. We met again, already off the program, and won some weird prizes from the show. A tennis lesson with an instructor and a day at an amusement park. It wasn't a dream date, of course, but who knows? Maybe it could be fun, right? And to tell the truth, at that moment, I thought it was a good choice, even knowing it was the only option I had there. When I saw him, I was sure I'd made the right decision, or at least that's what I thought at the time. During the way there, we talked a lot. We were relaxed. Everything flowed as if we were longtime friends. It was one of those days when everything seemed perfect and spontaneous. He talked a lot, I did too, and there was a connection that seemed like it would last forever. At least that's what I felt at that moment. But what I couldn't imagine even in my dreams was that all that facade he was showing was exactly that, a very well-constructed lie. Everything changed from one moment to another with a simple question that made him furious. We were at the club playing tennis, and after a while we decided to take a break and chat while the instructor took a phone call. Out of nowhere, without thinking, I asked him, "So, what were the other candidates like? I mean, what were the other guys who were on the program like?" His response was blunt and dry. "Why are you asking me that question?" At first I thought he was joking, but his expression changed completely, and that smile he always had began to disappear. I noticed that something at that moment bothered him. I told him, "Hey, sorry, I was just asking how you'd feel if I made you compete with two other girls, and right after choosing you started asking about them." His face became hard and irritated when I said that. He stared at me very seriously and said, No, you don't do that. That's nonsense. Besides, I don't want you talking about any other guy while you're with me. That doesn't work with me." At that moment, I felt horrible, like I'd done something very wrong, and he was showing me that with that look. And as strange as it may seem, that crazy and twisted logic he had in his head started making sense to me there. Without realizing it, I felt guilty, as if I was the one who had provoked him. We went back to playing tennis, but everything had changed. The atmosphere that was relaxed before was now heavy and somewhat aggressive. Rodney no longer had that smile from before. It was as if someone had completely erased it from his face. The balls he sent to me, which seemed normal before, now came with absurd force. And every time I had to hit one back, the ball came directly at my face or some part of my body with tremendous violence. The instructor who was watching me seemed nervous, and I could see in his eyes that he was also noticing something was wrong. He said he was controlling his strength, but that weird smile on his face and the distant look in his eyes showed something else. I knew he was lying. We went to our separate locker rooms, and while I was taking my shower, I couldn't stop thinking about how stupid Rodney had been. It seems silly now, but at that time things were different, much more innocent. You didn't think about these dangerous things like today. When everything seems darker, and any attitude like that is a warning to be careful. At that moment, I really didn't think this man could be a threat, just that he had reacted with anger, and that's it. When I finished my shower, right when I was coming out, I heard a strange noise in the back of the locker room. I thought it was another girl getting ready to play. But that sound, that small vibration seemed very strange to me. I came out with my towel ready to get dressed, but what I saw was a scene I can't explain. Rodney was sitting there in just his underwear, fresh out of the shower, waiting for me. I froze and asked, "What the hell are you doing here? What are you doing?" And he, with that strange smile, told me he was waiting for his girlfriend while she showered, that there was no problem, that he was just checking to see if everything was okay. Nervous, I replied, "Are you spying on me?" And then, in a moment that seemed like something out of a horror movie, that smile disappeared, and he quickly approached, pushing me against the wall with a hand on my neck. "Maybe I don't care what you have to say," he whispered with that ice-cold voice. I desperately said he was scaring me, but he didn't seem to care. On the contrary, he started saying that I really should be afraid, that I was talking too much and had to be quiet. Then he dropped a phrase that still echoes in my head. "Now get dressed to go to the amusement park and then to my house. Before this night is over, I'm going to show you how I forgive you. I'm going to give you the best night of your life." At that moment, I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or what to do. I just felt fear, a lot of fear. Rodney started yelling at me and telling me to behave, that if I made a scene, it wouldn't help anything, that no one was going to help me, and that people hate weak and fearful people like me. And in that state of total panic, I said, "Okay, sorry," that I didn't even really feel. I just wanted him to get out of there and someone to help me. And he left, but not because he cared, but because he was clearly afraid of someone else coming in at that moment. He just left and stayed outside waiting. And I, trembling, continued getting dressed and trying to stay calm, even knowing that what I really wanted was to run away and disappear from there. My head was a mess of nervousness and terror. I was completely desperate with his behavior, and with that last phrase he said to me. It was only at that moment that I realized how really dangerous this man was. And overcome by desperation, I decided to do something. Very luckily, I managed to jump through the window and run as far as I could, not knowing where I was going. I just wanted to escape. With the passage of time, Rodney disappeared from my mind like a bad memory, even knowing that encounter was just the beginning of something much worse. Time later, in the newspaper, I saw that he had been arrested for murdering several women. They discovered he was guilty of at least 7 murders, but suspected that he had actually killed more than 100 people. When I found out about this, I felt like a bunch of stones had fallen in my stomach. That's when I really understood that I could have been one of his victims. I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't managed to escape from him in time, but I really didn't want to know that answer. Today, more than 40 years later, my children look at my photos from that time when I was young and innocent, thinking everything was a game, without imagining that that day almost cost me my life. They always say I was lucky to escape, that I was fortunate, but it's not quite like that. That experience was like a bullet that hit me in the chest, and even today, at night, I remember that afternoon and how everything could have ended in the worst way for me. After so many years, I learned something I would have liked to know at that time. Our intuition exists for a reason. When something inside us screams that something is wrong, it's better to listen. It doesn't matter if the person seems polite, beautiful, or charming. If you feel you need to get away, get away. Don't worry about being rude or hurting anyone's feelings. Your safety is worth more than any embarrassment. And if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, remember, trust what you're feeling and do what your instinct tells you, especially if it tells you to run. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew, and I'm going to share with you an experience that completely changed my vision about online relationships. This happened more than 2 decades ago, but even today, I remember every detail as if it were yesterday. It was 2002, and I was 21 years old. At that time, social networks didn't exist yet, and cell phones could barely send text messages. To meet people, we used online chat rooms called IRC. These were environments where anyone could enter with a made-up nickname and talk to strangers from all over the world. I frequented these rooms constantly. It was addictive having access to so many different people, each with their own story and personality. Of course, many people lied about who they really were, but at the time that didn't worry me. I was young, naive, and believed everyone was as honest as I was. That's how I met Karina. She used a username inspired by an Evanescence song, full of symbols and numbers. We started talking in an open room. Then we moved to private messages. She was 22 years old, 1 year older than me, and our connection was immediate. Karina was exactly the type of girl who attracted me at that time. Black dyed hair, intense blue eyes, always dressed in black, and with several piercings on her face. The Gothic style was at its peak, and she perfectly embodied that aesthetic that fascinated me so much. Since phone calls were expensive and cell phones had minute limits, our communication happened mainly through IRC and some emails. To prove we were real people, we developed our own system. We'd take photos holding paper with date and time covering one eye. It was our creative way of confirming authenticity. For 3 months, we lived an intense passion through screens. We talked day and night, exchanged verification photos, and I fell madly in love. I even told her she was everything I was looking for in life, and she would laugh when I said these things. For me, those were the best months of my life in that regard, until suddenly she disappeared. She stopped responding on IRC, didn't answer my emails, simply vanished. I was desperate, sending messages every day. "Are you okay? Why don't you respond?" Nothing. Weeks passed and I had already lost hope. Then, when I least expected it, I received a message that chilled me. "Get on IRC." My heart raced. I thought she had come back, that we were going to resume our conversation. I rushed in and received a direct message. "Hi." I asked how she was, if everything was okay, but she ignored my questions. Instead, she was direct. "What's your address? I want to send you something." At that moment, blind with passion and excited to be talking to her again, I didn't think twice. I gave her my complete address, imagining it might be some gift or letter. The response I received destroyed my world. "I'm Karina's husband. Stop sending messages to my wife or you'll be next." I was paralyzed. I tried to explain that we were just friends, that if she was married, I respected that. But within minutes, the account was disconnected. I never managed to talk to Karina again or get any news from her. 2 weeks later, a package arrived at my house. The sender was just Karina without a complete address. I was unsure whether I should open it, but curiosity won. Inside the box was a kitchen knife with a dried brownish-red substance on the blade that looked like blood. I immediately called the police. I spent hours at the station explaining the whole situation, the online relationship, the threats, the package with the knife. I showed all the evidence, photos, emails, saved conversations. The officers were impressed with the story, but I don't know if the investigation had any concrete results. The phrase "you'll be next" gained a much more sinister meaning after that package. It was obvious it wasn't just an empty threat. Today, almost 20 years later, I look back and see how different we were at that time. The internet was new, wild territory where anything could happen. We didn't have the awareness we have today about the dangers of meeting strangers online and sharing personal information. This experience taught me that behind a screen can be anyone with any intention. What seemed to be true love revealed itself to be something much darker and more dangerous. To this day, I wonder who Karina really was, if the photos were really hers, if she was being manipulated by her husband, or if she was an accomplice from the beginning. Some questions will never have answers, but the lesson was engraved forever. On the internet, not everything is what it seems to be. Look, I know it might sound conceited to say this, but I always considered myself a pretty girl. But over time, I discovered that's not always a good thing, you know. Especially because it increases the chances of strange people wanting to bother me. Whenever my friends told me about things that happened to them on the street, I was impressed. They talked about men who kept following them, saying disgusting things, and even touching them without permission. I always felt kind of lucky because that had never happened to me. I thought it was just luck, but later I understood the real reason. The truth is it never happened because I was always with some man nearby, whether my dad, my brothers, or some friend. It's pretty sad when you think about it, right? A woman only feeling protected when she has a man by her side. This needs to change urgently. This year I started studying biology at the university. Most of my friends went to other colleges, and I was still getting to know the people in my program. Anna, a friend I've known for years who studies nursing, was the one who accompanied me there most. "Julia, wait up," she always shouted when I walked too fast. We had a habit of eating together after classes. That day, when classes ended, we decided to go to a diner near campus. "What do you want?" she asked. "I don't know, a sandwich and coffee, I guess." Anna shook her head and said, "You're so boring, you know. It's like you have no social life at all." While we were talking, I went to check my bag to see if I had money. When I opened my wallet, a pink paper fell to the floor. "That's weird," I said, surprised. "You dropped something," Anna said. Before I could pick it up, she had already grabbed the paper and was reading it. When she finished, she looked at me like someone who had discovered a secret. "Why didn't you tell me? You barely got here to campus, and this is already happening." I was confused and asked, "Tell you what, Anna?" She handed me the paper, and when I read it, I almost fell over. "Want to go out with me, Julia?" My God, what was that? In any other situation, it might even be cute, but at that moment, it gave me a horrible feeling. I barely knew anyone there, didn't have a boyfriend, and much less someone who would write a note like that knowing my name. "Julia, I have no idea who it was, but it must be just a secret admirer," Anna said, trying to calm me down. But I was terrified because I had no idea when someone had managed to slip that into my bag. "Hey, relax, it might have been a mistake. Someone put it in the wrong bag," she tried again. "But Anna, look here, it has my name written on it." This wasn't helping at all. I tried to breathe deeply and said, "Okay, it's probably nothing." In the weeks that followed, I almost forgot about the strange paper because no one else brought up the subject. But one day Anna arrived at campus, very excited to greet me. "Hi, Julia." It was around that time that I met Jake, a guy from my class. It was always easier for me to talk to boys than girls, so I ended up making more male friends. Jake seemed to like me, and one day after class, he approached and asked, "I thought you'd already be here." I replied, "No, I guess today is your lucky day." He smiled and said, "Can I get your number? I never asked for your contact to be able to text you." Without thinking much, I tore a piece from my notebook, wrote my number, and handed it to him. "Thanks, Julia. I'll send you a message so you have my number too." Class continued normally until the end. When I was packing up my things and putting my phone in my backpack, I saw something that made my blood run cold. 2 pink papers inside my bag. My heart started beating uncontrollably, and I felt anxiety taking over me. Again, what did this mean? With trembling hands, I opened the papers and read, "You still haven't answered if you want to go out with me, Julia." Trembling with fear, I crumpled the papers and threw them in the trash, feeling my heart almost jumping out of my mouth. I turned to leave the classroom running, but bumped into someone right in the middle of the hallway. It was a man with black hair, slanted eyes, poorly trimmed beard, and very pale skin. Something about the way he looked at me made me super uncomfortable. He had a weird appearance, as if he shouldn't be there. "Sorry," I murmured quietly. "I'm kind of nervous." I tried to go around him, but the guy prevented me from passing. When I saw that, I understood immediately that he wasn't there by accident. "You should be nervous," he said with a voice that gave me chills all over. At that moment, his behavior became even more frightening. I jumped back, trying to get away, but he came after me. "Hey, what's your problem?" I screamed. But he didn't care and kept approaching with an expression that really scared me. Out of nowhere, his hand grabbed my neck forcefully and cut off my breathing. I felt like I was suffocating, and the most desperate thing was that no one around seemed to notice what was happening. When I thought the situation was going to get even worse, someone pushed the man and started defending me. It was Jake. The attacker went after him and they started fighting, but I couldn't take it anymore. I felt like I was going to faint and everything went dark around me. Now I'm here in the hospital, still trying to process everything that happened. Jake told me they managed to arrest the guy. I'm very scared. This is true. But one thing I know, I'm not going to let this slide. This man needs to answer for what he did. And I'm going to fight until the end to make that happen. Because no woman should go through what I went through. I never imagined that a simple swipe on my phone could change my life forever. I was browsing Tinder that night when Daniel's profile appeared. I found him interesting and attractive, so we decided to talk. After exchanging some messages, he suggested we meet in person. Daniel lived on the outskirts of Phoenix and offered to send a car to pick me up for dinner the next day. I was excited about the idea. I chose my favorite red dress and did my hair in a special way to make a good impression. I completed the look with red heels that matched perfectly, and I felt ready for our first date. Around 7:30 in the evening, a luxurious black car stopped in front of my house, and the driver took me to an impressive mansion on top of a hill. I was really impressed with the beauty and luxury of the place, even though it was nighttime. When I arrived, Daniel was waiting for me at the door. "Hello, Valerie. I hope you feel comfortable," he said with a smile. "My God, your house is bigger than my apartment. I replied, laughing, and he smiled too. There was something strange about the way he spoke, although I decided not to give it much importance and followed him inside his house. It was my first Tinder date, and I had never been in a place like that. The house was impressive. It had a pool, fireplace, chandeliers, and an open kitchen that I would dream of having someday. Daniel served us some wine glasses, and we sat down for dinner. The food was delicious. I think I had never eaten something so good in my life. So I ate with pleasure while enjoying a very pleasant conversation with Daniel. And everything was going wonderfully until I started feeling strange. Suddenly, my vision became blurred and my stomach felt nauseous. At that moment, I tried to focus on Daniel's face and could see he had a big smile that, unlike moments before, no longer made me feel so comfortable. What's in the food? I thought to myself, but tried to maintain my composure. I didn't want him to notice I was feeling sick, because I still wasn't sure if this had to do with something he did on purpose, or if something in the food made me sick. But his fixed stare at me, and the smile he now had on his face, made me suspicious. While I struggled to stay calm and disguise my discomfort, Daniel asked me what my favorite horror movie was. "Mine is Friday the 13th, he said while I could barely mumble something. And suddenly, as if someone had flipped a switch, everything went black and I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was trapped in a room with red lights, and my body was tied to what looked like a surgery table. I was very confused and dazed, unable to distinguish if this was real, or if I was in the middle of a nightmare. Suddenly, I heard a metallic noise and tried to follow it with my eyes, even though I was very dizzy. That's when I saw Daniel sharpening a knife very close to my feet. He was wearing a hockey mask, but I could tell it was him. Those deep green eyes were unmistakable. I tried to scream and move, but I was trapped. My body was immobilized with straps, and I couldn't do more than be terrified, watching as he now approached me with the huge knife in his hand and a diabolic look. I knew it was the end. Daniel positioned himself in front of me, and I started begging him to please not hurt me. I pleaded for him to let me go and guaranteed I wouldn't call the police. But the only thing I heard back was an evil laugh. But just when he was about to say something more, his words were cut off by the sound of a gunshot, and then the dry thud of his body falling to the floor. Suddenly, a girl appeared out of nowhere, and the first thing I noticed was that she was missing half of her left arm, while in the other she had a gun. "I'm Helena," she told me agitatedly. "This lunatic had me prisoner for days. We have to get out of here right now," she said, trembling with fear. I realized she was as terrified as I was. And while she was removing my straps, I could notice that the wound on her arm was recent, since I could see the bandage stained with blood under her shirt sleeve. But it wasn't time to ask questions. So as soon as she freed me, we ran out of there. The place where I was a kind of basement, and while I ran outside with Helena, I realized the house was a real labyrinth. We finally got to the yard after going through several doors and ran down the hill until we found a good Samaritan who offered to take us to the police station. They provided us with care and immediately sent a patrol to the location. However, when searching the house, the police found neither Daniel nor traces of blood, as if he had never been there. I was absolutely shocked. I was sure that Helena's shot had hit him, and I'm sure she believed the same. Helena went to the hospital, and I returned home still in shock. I deleted my Tinder account as soon as I got home and swore never to go out with strangers again. That night I collapsed into bed exhausted and fell asleep instantly, but I woke up later, startled by the sound of glass breaking somewhere in the house. I didn't have any pets that could be responsible, so my heart froze with terror. I got up from bed and slowly leaned toward the window, but I almost had a heart attack. There was Daniel with his hockey mask again, trying to open the window. He had already broken the glass and was now trying to open the lock. So I ran from the room toward the front door to try to escape, but suddenly I heard a crash behind me. My God, he's inside, I thought, completely terrified, and knowing I wouldn't have time to look for the keys to the front door to open it. I hid under the kitchen table, praying he hadn't seen me. Once there, I could see his legs advancing toward the kitchen, looking around as if searching for something. "Valerie, want to play hide and seek?" "Well, now it's my turn," he said with a chilling voice. I covered my mouth to not make a sound, wishing I could open a hole in the floor and disappear. Suddenly, I lost sight of him, and while I frantically tried to see where he had gone, I felt his strong hands grabbing me by the hair and pulling me out from under the table with a jerk. I was trapped. His grip was so strong it made me scream in pain and fear. I knew I was now in serious trouble. However, while we struggled, I reached toward the utensil drawer. I grabbed a knife, and in a quick movement, I stabbed it into his chest. At that moment, Daniel staggered, and before he could attack me, he ran toward the door, leaving a trail of blood. I immediately ran to tell the neighbors, who quickly called the police. When the officers searched my house, they came back without finding anything. Daniel had disappeared again. I started thinking he probably wasn't human, that he was some kind of ghost or demon. Surviving a point-blank gunshot and now a stab to the chest was too strange. My neighbors suggested staying with them for a few days, but I was too scared to leave the house. So I locked everything and spent 3 days on total alert. On the 4th night there was a torrential rain, and while I was fighting my nerves, the doorbell started ringing. I didn't open immediately, of course. "Who is it?" I asked nervously. "It's Thomas." "Open up, Valerie." What was Thomas doing here? We'd had a complicated breakup, and although we managed to resolve things, the truth is he shouldn't have been at my house. But even so, I opened the door after peeking and seeing him soaked with a backpack in his hands. When he entered, he hugged me and said he was worried about me. I heard what happened. "Just let me stay with you for a few days and protect you," he insisted. At that moment, I needed company, so I accepted. That night, we had dinner together, and after smoking a bit, he started talking about those days at the university when we were dating. After a good while, we went to bed. I slept deeply cuddled up to him and didn't hear anything strange that night. But when I woke up, I noticed something strange. Thomas wasn't next to me. I went to the living room calling him, and there he was lying on the couch. So I approached to wake him up. But when I turned on the lamp, I was horrified. Thomas was dead. He had his neck broken, and on his forehead there was a small flash drive embedded. I took it, and even with all the shock I was in, I put it in my laptop, and when I opened the file, there was a video from just a few hours ago where Thomas was with me in bed. And while I was sleeping deeply, he got up and took a knife out of his backpack. From the focus angle, I could tell the video was recorded from my closet, and with a pale face, I saw Thomas approach me and raise the knife with the clear intention of stabbing me. But just when he was about to do it, the screen went black and changed to selfie mode. It was Daniel smiling and holding a note. Then he walked toward Thomas's body, which was already arranged on the couch. He opened the corpse's mouth and stuck the note in before cutting the video. The truth was devastating. Thomas hadn't come to protect me, as he said, but to kill me and blame Daniel. And of course he would be the first suspect, the perfect crime. But somehow Daniel had saved me. I don't know how or when, but he had managed to infiltrate my house and hide in my closet. I suppose he got angry that Thomas wanted to take away from him the pleasure of finishing me off himself. Maybe he just wanted to end our story with his own hands, because I don't believe he hid there to protect me from my psychopath ex-boyfriend. Now I live in this haunted paradox. I owe my life to a killer who was stalking me. Daniel saved me, but not out of kindness. It was out of possessiveness and sickness. He wants to be the only one to decide my fate. And that certainty terrifies me more than any nightmare, because I know our story isn't over yet. He's out there, waiting for the right moment to come back and finish what he started. What I'm about to tell you isn't made up. My uncle Jeremiah told me this story several years ago, when I was still spending summers at his cabin up in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. We were sitting on his porch, drinking coffee from metal cups, watching the mist roll through the pine trees when he started talking. "Listen, kiddo," he said, his voice low and serious. "There are things a man sees that he keeps to himself, because if you tell people, they just laugh. But there are things that keep happening whether you laugh or not." Uncle Jeremiah wasn't one to run his mouth. He wasn't much of a talker, but when he did speak, you knew he meant every word. That night, he told me about something that happened back in the late 80s and early 90s, when Reagan was still president, and the whole country was drunk on prosperity and New Age spirituality. He said around those years, strange people started showing up in the small mountain towns. They claimed they were there to teach workshops about native plants, about traditional healing practices. Said they wanted to preserve our heritage. Sounded good enough, right? But these weren't your regular teachers. These folks rolled up in white vans, carried expensive cameras, recording equipment, and spoke in all kinds of fancy terminology. They called themselves the Sacred Seed Foundation. At first, people welcomed them with open arms. They gave talks at the elementary school, set up booths at the farmers' market, even held sessions in the town square. They brought dried herbs, pressed flowers, played drums and tambourines, and offered free spiritual cleansings. Lots of folks were drawn to them, especially the young people and some of the hippies who'd been drifting through the mountains looking for mushrooms and enlightenment. But Uncle Jeremiah noticed something wasn't adding up. When someone talks pretty about the land but has never worked it with their hands, he said, you'd better be suspicious. They're not here to plant anything. They're here to take something. Over time, he noticed the same young people who'd been hanging around with that group started to change. One by one, they stopped talking to their families. Others just disappeared without saying where they were going. And it always happened right before the annual autumn equinox festival that the town held every year up in the mountains. Every year, a girl would vanish. Usually someone from out of state, because it was easier to say she'd just gone back home. Nobody asked too many questions, he told me, because the mayor was giving them permits and staying quiet about the whole thing. Don't know what they were paying him, he said, but he sure kept his mouth shut. That was his story. He only told it once, and I never brought it up again. But it stuck with me because there was something in his voice, fear, maybe, but also anger. Even though years have passed, I still remember what he told me at the end. Be careful of people who say they're here to help. Sometimes what they're really hungry for is souls. Uncle Jeremiah's story went something like this. Everything started with good intentions, the way things do before they go sideways. These people arrived like missionaries, but without Bibles. They didn't carry guns or badges, but they had smiles and beautiful words. Lots of talk about wanting to help, or so they claimed. I'm trying to remember all this now and put it in order. They entered the town through the front door. First, they talked to the city council, the school teachers, the people who ran the local businesses. They weren't trying to force anything on anyone, quite the opposite. They presented themselves as humble, like they were there to learn from us. At first, it actually felt kind of flattering, because it was rare for outsiders to look at us like we had something valuable to offer. They bought everything: corn, beans, honey, local whiskey, handmade crafts, even the carved wooden figures the local artisans made. And they didn't haggle over prices, they paid well. That's what made people trust them. Even the local men started offering them work, helping with workshops, preparing land for retreat centers, watching their cars with out-of-state plates. They paid in cash, not with promises or IOUs. The strangest thing was they never traveled alone, always in groups. One would speak perfect English, another seemed European. They all had accents. Some sounded like they were from California, others from Central America. They said they came from all over, but their hearts were with indigenous peoples. They wanted to share ancient knowledge. That's when I knew something was wrong, because there's a difference between respecting something and just taking advantage of what people have protected their whole lives. What interested them most wasn't the corn or the prayers, it was the mushrooms. The sacred ones, as they called them, the ones that grow after the rain in the high country, where not just anyone knows how to find them. They started approaching the old healers, the ones who still kept the old ways, offering them money to teach them how to use the mushrooms properly. I found out through old Martha Whitehorse, who took them up to the sacred places once and came back pale as a ghost. She said they weren't normal people, that while she was praying, they just laughed and filmed everything with their cameras. Martha even cried, saying she'd seen her dead mother in the clouds. After that, Martha never spoke about it again, and little by little, they started taking the young people, first locals, then the drifters who showed up with backpacks and stayed in houses the group was renting. The kids were going to be trained, they said, to become guides, healers, keepers of ancient wisdom. But they never came back the same. The ones who returned spoke strangely, like they were always somewhere else, thin and hollow-eyed, barely recognizing their own parents. They found one walking alone on the highway, saying the stars were talking to him. Another one nearly bit his tongue off from chewing too many mushrooms. Later I learned they were sending these young people to other states, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, California. There they'd put them to work giving workshops, doing spiritual cleansings, talking about the sacred path. Meanwhile, they kept feeding them substances, keeping them drugged. And if anyone tried to leave, they'd threaten to leave them soulless. But nobody said anything because they kept buying crops, kept paying well. and even talked to the mayor like they were business partners. What they're really after, old Robert Clearwater told me one day, is power, and they're getting it through our children. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I tried talking to some parents, to the school principal, but nobody listened. They thought I was exaggerating or that I was just getting old and paranoid. But you know when something's wrong. The land has its way of warning you. The birds don't sing the same way and the air gets heavier. The dogs won't come near you. And right before that year's festival, a girl who'd been staying with them disappeared. She was from back east somewhere. They said she was up in the mountains doing a spiritual purification, but nobody asked too many questions. They just said she'd left, but I know that's not what happened. What I saw that night still makes me sick to think about. Uncle Jeremiah never told me all of this at once. He told it piece by piece, like he wasn't comfortable talking about it. But that night when we talked, just him and me, there was something he told me complete. I knew he was serious because he stared into the fire while he spoke, like the flames were bringing it all back like a movie. It was the last new moon before the big rains, he said. When the forest goes quiet and the air smells like closed earth. It was the night of their famous Living Roots festival they organized every year up in the mountains, where they supposedly celebrated unity with Mother Earth and all that nonsense. The town was more stirred up than usual. There was music, dancing, lots of food that didn't seem very authentic. People came from outside, tourists from California, folks from Seattle, some Asians, hippies, tourists with cameras, all smiling like they really knew what they were celebrating. But Uncle Jeremiah noticed something strange from early on. The people from Sacred Seed weren't with the crowd. They weren't dancing or eating. They'd gone up into the mountains with torches and backpacks, like some kind of expedition. Nobody followed them, and nobody asked questions except him. I saw them file up the mountain, and something gripped my chest, he said. A feeling I couldn't shake. I never trusted them much, and even though they'd never done anything to me directly, I always had a bad feeling. Everything they said felt like lies. So he gathered his courage, grabbed his hunting knife, a gas lantern, and followed them up an old trail. One nobody uses anymore since the landslides and roots closed it off. He said he walked for about 2 hours without making a sound until he started hearing the singing. It wasn't happy singing. It was slow, strange, like Viking chants, he said. Plus, there was a strong smell of sage, but also something else like sulfur, but not quite as sharp. That night was very dark, he said. The moon wasn't coming out completely. There were clouds covering it, like before a heavy storm. When he finally got close enough, he hid behind the trees and saw the scene. A clearing in the middle of the forest, surrounded by candles stuck in animal skulls, with a circle of people dancing barefoot, high out of their minds on substances. In the center was a white girl with flowers in her hair and eyes wide open like she couldn't blink. She wasn't speaking or crying, just sitting there still. Behind her stood one of the leaders, a tall, thin man with his face painted like a skull. He was reciting strange words while others put mushrooms in her mouth. She didn't resist, just swallowed. That girl wasn't there anymore, kiddo, he said. They'd emptied her out. At some point, the others knelt down and silence began. A heavy silence, like the forest itself was holding its breath. That's when the girl stood up on her own, without anyone telling her to. She walked to the edge of the clearing where there was some kind of altar made of dried branches and black stones. And there, she simply let herself fall. She didn't scream, didn't try to grab onto anything. It was like she had no control over her own body, like she'd lost all will. Uncle Jeremiah couldn't tell if she'd fallen into a cave, a well, or something they'd dug. He just heard the body hit something below, something that wasn't earth. He said it sounded hollow, like she'd fallen into something alive. That's when Uncle Jeremiah wanted to run, but something stopped him. The air suddenly turned cold, he said. The trees creaked like someone was pushing them, and from the darkness around the altar came a thick black mist that didn't smell like anything, but made his stomach turn. Then he heard the voice. According to him, it wasn't a human voice, at least not the voice of anyone from the Sacred Seed group. What he heard was different. It wasn't speaking English, and it kept talking in some other language, maybe German or Russian. He ran as fast as he could, fell twice, hit his head on a sharp rock, which left him with a small scar on his cheekbone that he carried until the day he died, but didn't stop until he reached his cabin. He said that night even the dogs didn't bark, like fear had gotten to everyone, and they all preferred to look the other way. The next day, nobody asked about the girl. Nobody mentioned anything. The festival continued like nothing had happened. And from then on, he told me, every year when that date approaches, the forest gets strange again, like something wakes up and starts prowling around. I don't know if everything he told me happened exactly as he experienced it, but from what his sisters told me, Uncle Jeremiah was never the same after that night. He never went up into the mountains alone again. He never spoke to the Sacred Seed people again. And whenever someone new came to town wanting to learn about the old ways, he'd claim he didn't know anything about it. He'd tell them to ask somewhere else. Over time, like everything else in this country, that too fell apart. The recession hit hard, and people didn't have money to eat, let alone attend spiritual workshops. The land started drying up for real, not from witchcraft, but from neglect. That's when the foundation, if that's what it really was, started shrinking. They stopped paying well, stopped paying on time, stopped paying at all. The workshops became fewer and the events smaller. People in town noticed they weren't driving new vans anymore, weren't staying in hotels, weren't making as much of a fuss. Some people started talking quietly, saying maybe their money had run out or the government wasn't supporting them anymore. But what really caught attention was that they stopped hiring locals. They weren't looking for helpers anymore, weren't offering work. They just kept visiting the few healers who still had access to the mushrooms. They kept paying them, at least for a while. Then what everyone knew would happen happened. The outsiders started leaving one by one, quietly. They left behind backpacks, instruments, even the stray dogs they'd picked up. The ones who stayed were the nationals, the ones who had nowhere else to go. Disoriented young people, thin, their minds burned out. Those were the last ones. But without money, without organization, and without an audience, they also started falling apart. When they saw nothing more was coming, that they couldn't steal any more or fool anyone else, one day they simply disappeared. They left the same way they came, without making noise. Nobody knew if Sacred Seed was really a national foundation, or if it was all just a well-told lie to take advantage of small communities and exploit the mushroom trade. Some said it was a cult, others that it was part of a government experiment, and still others swore it was just a group of opportunists disguised as spiritual teachers. The only thing certain is that many people who went looking for them to learn, to heal, to be part of something bigger, never came back. Though nobody names them anymore, and everything remains in silence. The old folks like Uncle Jeremiah know that wasn't a fad or a misunderstanding. It was another form of conquest, softer, prettier on the outside, but just as destructive inside. That was the worst part, kiddo, he told me once. They didn't come with weapons, but they took souls. Since then, whenever someone arrives in town talking about ancestral wisdom or reconnecting with the earth, the elders just lower their heads, keep quiet, and close their doors just in case. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.